Chapter 10. In the blink of an eye, Fong Bujue swung his sword. Since he was not afraid at all, he was unusually calm in that situation. His reaction and movement were not affected at all. As he leaned his upper body backward to avoid the sharp claws of the zombie, he swung his sword horizontally. Fong Bujue was shocked to realize that the sword tore through the zombie's body as easily as cutting through tofu. After the flesh and bones on the monster's chest were sliced open, fresh blood spurted out and splashed Fong Bujue's face. A salty smell seeped into his nostrils, and there was a sticky and warm sensation. This game was so realistic in this aspect. It was as disgusting as it was in real life. The zombie was only cut by the sword, and it groaned in pain. Starting from the wound, the zombie melted into a puddle of meat paste and oozed all over the floor. Fong Bujue finally had the chance to look at the stats of the sword in his hand. Item name: Zombie must-die. Item type: Weapon quality: excellent. Offense points: quite strong element. None special effect: melts the zombie when you attack it. Can be taken out of the scenario. No. Remark: this sword is the early work of the legendary dwarven craftsman, or all must die. A crafty goblin merchant used a few bottles of Erguo 2 to purchase this sword from, or half a month later, or created Goblins Must Die. Fong Bujue studied the equipment stats for a few seconds before the system announced, "You've completed the beginner's tutorial." Automatically teleported out in 60 seconds. Right then, another section of the game menu was unlocked. There was a 60-second countdown, and there was an option for teleport now. Fong Bujue chose to teleport. His body morphed into a white light, and he left the scenario in a flash. From his perspective, it was just a flash of white light, and he was back in the elevator. The sword in his hand was no longer there, and the blood stains on his body had disappeared. Everything in the elevator was normal, just like when he first entered the game. The lights were bright, and there was only his reflection in the mirror. The things that happened in the last 10 minutes were like a short, illusory nightmare. The scenario has been completed. Calculating reward. Obtained EXP, 70. Game coins, 700. Acquired equipment, none. Mission completed, 0/00. Special and hidden mission completed, 0. Worldview unlocked, none. Time of terror points increase, 0. Highest terror points, 0%. Average terror points, 0%. Your terror rating is Embodiment of Valor. You have received an additional reward. Please choose later. Acquired skill points, 30. Skill points bonus EXP, 30. Game coins, 300. Scenario cleared reward. Newbie's backpack X1 settlement complete. Please continue. This information was displayed on the screen on the wall. The system said, "You have reached level 2. Maximum stamina points increased. Current stamina points, 200,200. At the same time, Fong Bujue saw that the Mastery tab in the menu had been unlocked. There were 6 masteries, but 5 of them were shaded over, and next to them was the level. An A. Only the General Ability tab was lit up, and the Mastery level was F. Mastery was the most important setting for the player in Thriller Paradise. Fong Bujue, who had read the game manual, remembered it clearly. The meaning of NA was none. You know nothing about it, and you are unable to use the skill of that element. The meaning of F was very bad. When you reach this level, you will be able to use the skill of that element, and the success rate is 20%. When the reward was displayed, the elevator door opened again. This time, it was not a corridor, but a square room with 4 metallic walls. It was about 5 times bigger than the elevator. The light shone down from the ceiling, and there were 2 cylindrical glass pillars in the middle of the room. They were empty. Fong Bujue had nothing to say about his own terror points. When his fear was quantified into terror points, he saw 3 zeros in front of him. The terror rating did not mean much to Fong Bujue. According to the game manual, after the scenario was over, there were 5 ratings based on the terror points. They were courageous, courageous, panicked, scared out of your wits, and scared out of your wits. A situation like Fong Bujue's, where all the terror points were 0, was impossible or else the game designer would have added a new rating to it, courageous. For the beginner's tutorial, Feng Bujua's completion rate was theoretically the best because life points and stamina points had nothing to do with the rating. There was no difference between clearing the scenario unscathed and clearing the scenario on the brink of death. In Feng Bujua's rating, there was nothing that could be better. However, he did not show much joy. He merely sighed and walked to the glass pillar on his left. A new option appeared before his eyes. Please select the type of backpack. On the virtual menu, there were two types of backpacks. One was slanted over the shoulder and stuck close to the back, and the other was slung over the waist. He thought about it for a few seconds and chose the first option. Then, the backpack glowed with white light and appeared inside the glass pillar. When the white light materialized, the glass pillar opened horizontally, and Feng Bujua reached out to grab the backpack. At the same time, the Inventory and Equipment tab in his menu was unlocked. Your inventory is a storage space. The current maximum storage is 10 items. As long as the items can fit inside the inventory, they can be stored. Some of the items might be living creatures, and they can only be placed inside the inventory when the player gains control over them. Special reminder, the player is unable to enter the inventory, so please do not attempt to do so. You can check the equipment you have on you from the Equipment tab. Anything that you can equip is considered equipment, and there is no limit to the number or position of the equipment. For example, you can hold a knife in your left hand and a baseball bat in your right, and you can wear brass knuckles on both your hands. Your apparel is not considered equipment and is bound to your character's image. It cannot be removed or destroyed. You can only change the apparel settings in the login lobby. Apparel can be purchased at the market. Even though there was a market currently, there was no way to purchase paid items. The closed beta players could only wear the default apparel to play the game. Nowadays, many game companies were eager for quick success. When the game was being tested, the development of the game was only about 70%, but the store was already listed. They couldn't wait to sell items such as items, costumes, skins, red and blue, etc. There were also some malignant tumors in the industry that directly asked the company's internal staff to go to third-party websites to sell all kinds of excellent equipment or rare pets. However, this dream company's strategy was different. Their marketing strategy during the closed beta was completely focused on the sales of the hardware. The game's completion rate was already above 95% when the closed beta started. In the era of fourth-generation photon computers, there was no need for players to test for bugs. They could just use the AI to do the calculations. Therefore, the closed beta was mainly to sell the new gaming hub, an L2055 that was exclusive to Thriller Paradise. The Dream Company strictly prohibited the trading of virtual items and currency. They not only did not open a market on the official website, they even blocked the market in the game so that players could not enter. They also shut down the in-game currency trading function, making it very difficult for players to trade with each other. This was a display of confidence bordering on arrogance. The Dream Company seemed to be certain that as long as the game was an open beta, it would be a success. They were not in a hurry to earn money. During the closed beta, they only needed to expand their user base and build up their reputation. Please select your additional reward. 1. Randomly draw a piece of equipment that corresponds to your level. 2. 2,000 game coins. 3. 80 EXP. When he came to the other glass column, this option popped up before him. Today is the first day of the closed beta, Feng Bujua said. Game coins are useless for now, but EXP. He glanced at the menu. He was level 2, and his EXP was 0 out of 200. Therefore, this third reward should be 40% of his current level's EXP. Since his level was still low, it was not worth it. Therefore, he chose the equipment. After making his choice, the glass column shone with a white light, and then a stone appeared. Feng Bujua was startled. His first reaction was to suspect that it was some kind of magic stone, but when he picked it up to look at its attributes, item name, stone item type, weapon quality, trash offense points, weak element, none special effect, none remark, an irregularly shaped stone that can be found anywhere. Sometimes it is picked up and used as a weapon. Even though it can be brought into or out of the scenario, people usually toss it away after using it. They will not carry it with them or keep it in their inventory. In the empty room, Fong Bujue's scream echoed. What the F asterisk CK? This is. Chapter 11. After disconnecting the nerve connection and unlocking the gaming hub, Fong Bujue sat up to catch his breath. It was noon, and the sun was shining brightly outside the room. Fong Bujue lived on the 13th floor of an apartment building, the kind that required rent. He lived alone. His parents found out that they would not have the chance to appear in the book, so they died in anger several years ago, leaving behind a lonely and desolate main character, and saving the trouble of making up 2 more names. It could be said that the book had been opened and returned to the West, hiding its merits and reputation. Looking at the time, Fong Bujue realized that he had only played the game for 15 minutes. When Thriller Paradise was not in sleeping mode, the time in the game was 2-1. In other words, he felt like he had spent half an hour in the game. In sleeping mode, the connection was deeper, and the time ratio could be 10-1. As the saying went, there was no time in a dream. If the player insisted on staying online, they could complete 80 hours of game content in one night. Of course, this meant that he had dreamt for 8 hours in one night, and he would have a headache the next morning. The instruction manual for the gaming hub clearly stated that it was not recommended for players to play the game for more than 4 hours in sleeping mode. Fong Bujue had obviously read that and remembered it. Fong Bujue exited the gaming hub not because he needed to rest, but because he had promised to play the game with a friend. That day was the first day of the closed beta, and the server opened at 8 a.m. That friend was not free that day, so Fong Bujue wanted to wait for him. He just wanted to familiarize himself with the game. He did not want to level up too high and cause the 2 of them to lag behind each other. Speaking of which, did Fong Bujue have nothing to do in the middle of the day? Yes, he had nothing to do. Earlier, he had been described as a mystery novelist. Now, people would think that the kid was one of those big authors who could live without writing, right? Obviously, that was not the case. Fong Bujue had some fame, but he was not a household name. His books were not bad, and each of them could be published, and the publishers were willing to work with him. He was one of those novelists who couldn't make a lot of money, but wouldn't starve to death. He had a 2-page column in a weekly magazine, serializing a detective story. Every month, he had to submit a draft, and he had to submit all the content needed for the next month. If the quality was not good enough, it would be returned. At the latest, he had to finish editing it before the end of the month. The royalties for this job were paid monthly. However, with this income alone, he could barely get by in a city like S-City. Therefore, Fong Bujue was also writing a series of detective novels, which were the kind of books that cost money to print and sell. Every time he wrote such a book, Fong Bujue could earn some money and save it. It could be considered a little surplus. But why did he have nothing to do in broad daylight? That was easy to explain. Using Fong Bujue's own words to describe his writing in daily life, it was plenty of inspiration, timely submission of manuscripts, delicacies from all over the world, hotcakes. Lack of inspiration, difficult to write, a bowl of clear soup with noodles. Obviously, he had been in a state where he could not write. This person was very easygoing. If he couldn't write, there was no point in forcing it, so he played. Not only did he play, but he also claimed that he was collecting material. Therefore, basically, it was a myth to expect Fong Bujue to submit his draft on time. Every month, in the middle of the month, the editor of the magazine would carry his sword and ride 1,000 miles alone, killing his way to the door. His landlady, on the other hand, used a phoenix wing gold-plated sword and a spare key. She pushed the door open and slashed as soon as she entered. Whenever Fong Bujue arrived on this day, he would usually be prepared. He would lay down his spear and prepare for the battle. He would wait for the 2 of them to arrive and fight them for 300 rounds. They would fight until the sky darkened and the clouds changed color. In the end, they would leave 8 words in the sky. Want money? I don't have it. Well, it was not that exaggerated. Anyway, his living conditions were so comfortable. Let's talk about Fong Bujue's friend. According to the saying, birds of a feather flock together. Could Fong Bujue's friend be tall, rich, and handsome? That's right, tall, rich, and handsome. This person's surname was Wang, and his name was Tanji. He was Feng Bujue's childhood friend. In the dialect of S-City, they were called brothers in red pants. Since kindergarten, they were classmates. When they graduated from high school, Wang Tanji was admitted to medical school, and Feng Bujue became an idle person in society. How strong the relationship between these two people was could be explained in two ways: facts and hypotheses. Let's talk about the facts first. Why did Wang Tanji go to medical school? That was because Feng Bujue was determined to be Sherlock Holmes when he was young, and Holmes's assistant, Watson, was an old military doctor, so he went. Let's talk about hypotheses. If Wang Tanji was a woman, then the nature of my novel would change, because Miss Wang might have lost her virginity to Feng Bujue for many years. In view of the hypotheses just now and the wild thoughts in everyone's minds, I have to say one more thing. Don't worry, that was just a hypothesis. They were both men, and they were both heterosexual. Wang Tanji's family was very rich. It didn't matter how much money he had. Anyway, he could live a good life without working at all. He was also slightly handsome. He was a little taller than Feng Bujue, just 8 meters. He was gentle, kind, and slightly cowardly. He didn't like to be in the limelight, and he was modest and tolerant. In short, it was hard to find fault with a person like him. He was a sharp contrast to Feng Bujue, the weirdo. Wang Tanji could be said to be a good young man who was praised by everyone. However, Feng Bujue was often described as cynical, temperamental, and a hipster. However, things in the world were just so miraculous. Two people like them could actually become brothers. The afternoon passed quickly. Feng Bujue spent another hour reviewing some information on the official website. Because he had already entered the game and completed the beginner's tutorial, many things were clearer when he looked at the explanation now. The rest of the time, he was making vermicelli noodles. It wasn't because he particularly liked it, but because he had saved the money to buy flour instead. He was a weirdo. He actually calculated how much he ate, down to each meal, and calculated the specific number of food he needed to not starve to death. Then he used all his savings in the bank, which wasn't much to begin with, to buy a gaming pod. The rest of the money was used to buy flour, pay for water and electricity, and so on. You could say that he was a careful person. He actually spent a sum of money that was close to his limit to buy a luxury item. The new gaming pods were very expensive. You could say that he was extravagant, but he would never let himself be embarrassed to the point where he couldn't eat. In the blink of an eye, it was already evening. Feng Bujue finished his dinner with a bowl of clear noodles. Wang Tanji called and said that he had already logged into the game and had just finished the beginner's tutorial. He was scared half to death and was covered in cold sweat. He went offline to make a phone call and calm himself down. Feng Bujue, I really envy you. What is cold sweat? I haven't experienced it for a few months. The two exchanged a few words, told each other their in-game ID, and prepared to go online and fight. Chapter 12. Feng Bujue crawled into the gaming hub and logged into the game in non-sleeping mode. Non-sleeping mode and sleeping mode logged into different servers, so the two modes could not be connected. When he arrived at the login lobby, he clicked on the game. This time, there was no announcement. The screen only showed the game menu, such as social options, friend list, and blacklist. There was also a game introduction. If the player had not read it on the website, they could browse it in this lobby. Considering the time ratio, this could save them twice the time. Feng Bujue found Wang Tanji's ID and added him as a friend. Then, he sent him a team invitation. After Wang Tanji joined the team name appeared on the screen next to Feng Bujue. It showed the ID and level of the two members. Feng Bujue, Level 2, Wang Tanji, Level 1. Please select the game mode that the team wishes to join. 3 options appeared on screen. They were Solo Training Mode, Team Training Mode, and Solo Survival Mode, Normal. Since the two of them were in a team, the 2 modes that could only be played solo were gray icons that could not be selected. Brother Bujue, we have no choice but to enter the team training mode. Wang Tanji could communicate with Feng Bujue through the screen. In his login lobby, he could see the same information, but the control was in the team leader's hands. Let's go in first. Feng Bujue replied and clicked on the option. You have selected the team training mode. Please confirm. Confirmed. Coordinating the nerve connection. Generating scenario. Downloading. Please wait a moment. The elevator that Feng Bujue was in started to move again. It also felt like it was descending. At the same time, a paragraph appeared before his eyes, and it was accompanied by the system announcement. You're about to enter the same scenario as other players. Before you enter the team training mode for the first time, please understand the following. A. In non-confrontational mode, any attack toward other players will be limited by the system, and your intention will not be translated into actual action. In modes or scenarios where players have the possibility of confrontation, any attack toward your teammates will be limited by the system, and your intention will not be translated into actual action. AI. You will not be able to translate into actual action. B. Any words that are deemed as sensitive by the system will be silenced, such as the names of political figures, profanities, and the names of animals, plants, and objects in certain contexts. C. Deliberate use of slow-motion mouth movements, gestures, words, drawings, and other methods to attack other players will be restricted by the system. The player's intentions will not be translated into the character's actions. D. Regardless of gender, any behavior determined by the system to be sexual harassment, including the intention to use the methods listed in sections B and C, will be restricted by the system. The player's intention will not be able to be translated into the character's actual actions. Repeated attempts will be forcibly disconnected, and the player's citizen ID will be permanently added to the system's blacklist, becoming a high-priority monitoring target. E. Any behavior determined by the system to be discriminatory will be dealt with in the same way as Sections D. Players who violate Sections D and E multiple times will have their account permanently deleted, and their citizen ID will be banned from using the company's products. For serious cases, their in-game actions will be recorded by the system and handed over to the police. For more details, please refer to the Internet Public Safety Law. Feng Bujue was living in the year 2055 of a parallel universe. In his world, sexual harassment and discrimination, disability, race, illness, and so on were very serious. The latter would not be punished, but the citizen ID of the serious cases would be added to the blacklist of various industries and organizations. The former, however, could be punished. Feng Bujue had played many games before, and he had even used the helmet to play a nerve-connected game. Basically, he had seen similar rules in all of them. As the photon computer continued to upgrade, the number of borderlines that the players could play decreased. One could say that these two behaviors were nipped in the bud. Download complete. You are currently in team training mode. In this mode, no scenario description, mission, or worldview will be provided. Completing this mode will only grant you EXP, no skill points, and no game coins. This mode does not grant you any extra reward for clearing it or terror rating. The game has started. After hearing the announcement, the elevator door opened. Almost at the same time, a creepy voice rang out in his ears. This time, it was a shrill male voice. Welcome to Thriller Paradise. Then, a creepy cackle appeared. Outside the elevator was another corridor, but this one looked quite spacious. The floor was tiled, and the two walls were painted white. There were 3 doors on one side, and they were all closed. The lighting on the ceiling was working normally, and there was plenty of light. The air was filled with the smell of disinfectant. Combined with the layout of the building, it was clear that this was a hospital. Feng Bujue immediately walked out of the elevator, and the door behind him closed. Then, the image of the elevator slowly twisted and disappeared before turning into a wall. Turning around, he saw another elevator door behind him, and it was parallel to the one that he had just exited. Feng Bujue walked to the door and poked his head in to look. He heard a scream. What's wrong with you? Feng Bujue asked. Wang Tanji gasped for air. I just made up my mind to go out, and you suddenly poked your head out. You gave me quite a scare. Do you mind if I ask? How much is your terror points after being scared by me? Feng Bujue was indeed curious. Wang Tanji heard that and turned to look at the menu. From Feng Bujue's perspective, This was just his eyes moving to somewhere else before returning to normal after a few seconds. Now that I've calmed down, my terror points are hovering around 3%, Wang Tanji answered. But how high did it jump in that 1 second? I have no idea. It rose according to the level of fear and then dropped, right? Feng Bujua mumbled. By the way, what is the color of the terror points displayed in the energy bar? Air bright red. Oh, I see. Brother Bujua, your illness, does it mean that the terror points have to be maintained at 0%? Of course, Wang Tanji knew about Feng Bujua's illness, but he was just an intern who had just graduated, so naturally, he could not do anything about it. It was because he was a medical student that he understood that Feng Bujua's illness was really dependent on luck. If he was lucky, he might be fine for 30 years, but if he was unlucky, he might die within 3 minutes. Yes, Feng Bujua replied calmly. Then I'm counting on you. If anything happens, you have to protect me, Wang Tanji said. Feng Bujua did not reply, but said, you only have 3 minutes to prepare before the scenario starts. If you don't come out now, you'll be forced out of the elevator by the system. Hearing that, Wang Tanji hurried out. Before the elevator completely disappeared, Feng Bujua took out a stone from his inventory and handed it to Wang Tanji. Take this and lead the way. Wang Tanji accepted the stone. After reading its attributes, his lips twitched. Brother Bujua, even if you picked this up and used it in the tutorial, you wouldn't have been so unwilling to throw it away and bring it back to the login lobby, right? You're just jealous, Feng Bujua replied shamelessly. Wang Tanji did not say anything and tossed the stone to the ground. He took out a fruit knife about 5 inches long from his inventory. Mine is better. Why do you have this? Feng Bujua shouted. Earlier, on the phone, Wang Tanji had said that his terror rating for the tutorial was fright. According to the official website, there was no additional reward for this rating. I picked it up in the scenario, Wang Tanji said. Feng Bujua said, let me take a look first. Wang Tanji shrugged and handed him the knife. Item name, fruit knife. Item type, weapon, rarity, broken offense points, slightly weak element, none special effect, none can be taken out of the scenario. Yes remark, at least this thing has a blade. Feng Bujua returned the knife to Wang Tanji and lamented, my luck. I can pick up anything from the scenario, but I can't take it out. Then, your stone it was drawn from the bonus reward after the scenario ended, Feng Bujua said. Are you afraid now? Yes, lead the way. Wang Tanji had no choice but to walk ahead with the knife in his hand. Once he started the game, he was already scared. After all, he was a normal person. No matter how brave a normal person claimed to be, when they played a scary game, they would be scared. Fear was a normal reaction. Furthermore, Thriller Paradise was a nerve-connected game, so it made the feeling of horror even more real. There was a corner about 20 meters ahead of them. There were 3 doors along the way, and they were all on the right. On the left was a wall, and there was nothing on it. The space on the wall was empty. There was no doctor's information, floor map, or even a health encyclopedia that a normal hospital would have. The 2 of them had just walked 5 or 6 meters, but before they even passed through the first door, they suddenly heard a burst of strange laughter that seemed to come from a little girl. Then, on the white wall on their left, countless bloody handprints instantly appeared, almost covering the entire wall and extending all the way to the end of the corridor. At the same time, both of them saw a black shadow flash by in the distance and hide in the corner. Chapter 13. Ju. Brother Ju, just. Wang Tanji stammered, and his terror points jumped again. Due to the accumulation of fear, even after he calmed down a few seconds later, his terror points did not return to the lowest level but stayed at 15%. With an expressionless face, Feng Bujua interrupted him calmly. Based on my analysis, we now have 2 choices. WH what? Wang Tanji could now make 4 words out of 2. The first choice, you take this knife and rush forward. After you turn the corner, slash at whatever you see, Feng Bujua replied. I'll cover you from behind. I choose the second choice. Wang Tanji's answer was so smooth that he did not even hear what the second choice was. Actually, I'm leaning toward the second choice as well. Feng Bujia walked to stand in front of Wang Tanji. He stood in front of the first door on the right and turned the doorknob. Everyone knew that for any horror game, the door was always a scary threshold. No one knew what would enter their eyes after they opened the door. Furthermore, there was the classic concept of death by opening the door. In other words, the moment the door was opened, the danger one faced was the same as when one turned the corner. A normal person would reach out to push the door open carefully, lower their body, and stay as far away from the door as possible, ready to run at any moment. However, Feng Bujua's action at that moment was more like he was running toward the toilet cubicle. He rushed forward, leaned his upper body forward, and pushed the door open. There was no light in the room, and the light from the corridor filtered in through the door. The scene inside the room was quite scary. It was a sick room about 10 square meters. The cupboard in the corner was overturned, and so was the trash can. There was a lot of debris scattered on the ground, but most of it looked like useless garbage such as rags, waste paper, broken flower pots, some dirty disinfectant cotton, broken glass medicine bottles, etc. The bed sheets of the hospital bed were torn, and the whole room was filled with the smell of blood. Almost everywhere that was illuminated by the light, there was no place that did not have blood. Training mode will become invisible when the player reaches level 5. Obviously, this mode is designed for newbies, to help the player level up to level 5 safely. As Feng Bujua spoke, he walked to the cupboard. He turned it around and rummaged through the things that were left behind. After the expert players finished the tutorial, they would at most play the training mode once, or they would not play it at all and directly enter the solo survival mode. This is because these kinds of players will have read the related game manual beforehand. They know that if they enter this mode that only rewards EXP, the reward will be much worse than the official solo survival mode. Feng Bujua found an unopened syringe inside the cupboard. He glanced at its attributes and placed it inside his inventory. From the reward, the training mode is even worse than the tutorial, so I believe that the difficulty of completing it is similar to the tutorial. As long as the player is not scared into disconnecting, even if they do not solve the puzzle, they can still clear the scenario. He bent down and sniffed the broken bottle of medicine. Actually, we could have just chased after the shadow and continued to play the game without going through these doors. I believe that after spending at most 20 minutes and experiencing several battles that might cost us our life points, we should be able to clear this scenario. Then why did you come in here? Wang Tanji asked. I told you there are 2 choices, but you chose the second one without even listening. Feng Bujua unfolded the paper balls one by one and placed them under the light. The second choice is to solve the puzzles. Didn't you just say, I said that we can clear the scenario without solving the puzzles, but I didn't say that there are no puzzles to be solved, Feng Bujua said. But even if we solve the puzzles, we won't get any skill points. He continued to study the papers, and his expression did not change. But there is at least one benefit to solving the puzzles, and that is it can lower the difficulty of the scenario. To put it simply, the work that requires physical strength can be done using intelligence. Then he picked out a piece of paper and handed it to Wang Tanji. Take a look at this. This is... Wang Tanji accepted the paper. He studied it for a few seconds before asking, a medical record? Item name, medical record of an unidentified person item type. Plot item quality, normal function. Unknown can be taken out of the scenario. No remark. This piece of paper is covered in blood in many places. That's your job. Feng Bujua waved the remaining stack of papers in his hand. I'll take a look at this stack. Wang Tanji only glanced at it, and his scalp went numb. Of the pile that Feng Bujua was holding, the one at the top had a strange human face painted on it. The two walked to the brighter corridor and studied it for about 3 minutes. Wang Tanji studied it closely. Since many parts of the medical record were covered in blood, he had to make guesses as he read. Feng Bujua, on the other hand, scanned through the papers one by one. He was a reading addict, and he read everything quickly. Furthermore, his memory, understanding, and reasoning were all very efficient. Furthermore, the content on the papers did not scare him, so in his eyes, it was no different from looking at the pictures in a magazine. Have you finished reading it? Feng Bujua asked this question first. Wang Tanji's eyes were still on the medical record. He thought about it and replied, "This is a male, 12 years old, and he's still a child." Feng Bujue scratched his chin. Oh, a young pioneer. No one knew how his mind worked. Leukemia. He's been hospitalized for quite some time, but Wang Tanji put down the medical record. From the medical record, he doesn't have much time left. He raised his head, and his eyes moved to the end of the corridor. He should be a ghost by now, Feng Bujue said. That might not be true. There are 3 doors here. We only know that the first door might be the boy's room, but we can't be sure whether the shadow that we saw earlier was him or not. He passed a stack of papers to Wang Tanji. You don't need to look at them in detail. Just look at their attributes. After a pause, he added, there are 6 different faces drawn on these papers, and there's a number at the corner of each paper. Item name, face sketch X6, item type, plot, item quality, normal function, unknown can be taken out of the scenario, no remark. These drawings are obviously drawn by the same person. The item can be separated or stacked, and when stacked, it will be treated as the same item. I'm getting more and more confused, Wang Tanji said. Feng Bujue nodded. That's normal. Obviously, we don't have enough clues to solve the puzzle. Then, he walked toward the second room. Other than that, I have a hypothesis. This hypothesis is why I wish to clear the scenario after solving the puzzle. He pushed open the second door and said, I believe we can find at least one official piece of equipment in these 3 sick rooms. Chapter 14. The scene inside the second room was even stranger than the first. The 4 walls, floor, and ceiling were all painted with human faces. The room was empty, but the faces on the walls were crowded together. And in the middle of this empty house, there was a lone safe placed on the ground. The solution to this puzzle is rather clear. Feng Bujue walked to the safe and squatted down to study it closely. After all, this is a training mode, and it probably took into account the player's inability to think calmly in fear. His words sounded like he was complaining about the difficulty level. Wang Tanji followed him in. At that moment, he felt like the faces on the walls were so lifelike that he could not even find 2 faces that were alike. It was as if there were hundreds of pairs of eyes staring at him in this room, and it made his hair stand on end. Brother Bujue, how about we move the safe out of here so that we can study it further? Wang Tanji suggested. That will take at most 3 minutes. Feng Bujue soon stood up again. He took out the 6 sketches, held them close to his eyes, and started to study the faces on the wall. When I look at the safe closer, there will be a system prompt telling me to key in the 6-digit code to open it. His eyes soon stopped. There it is. He walked to a wall and tilted his head to the left. There are plenty of human faces in this room, just to confuse the player's vision. He pointed at the wall. Look, there are 6 faces in a row, and they are the 6 faces in the sketches. They look the same. He compared the scary faces one by one, from left to right, top to bottom. Following the order of the 6 faces on the wall and the numbers on the corner of the sketches, he whispered, for 1, 6, 3, 5, 2. Feng Bujue said as he returned to the safe and started to key in the code. If we only opened the door for a cursory inspection when we explored the first room and did not conduct a detailed search, we would not have found the clues from the sketches. Then, when we opened the second room, we would not have been able to solve the code to the safe. He turned back to look at the 6 faces. Actually, the answer was placed at the area where the light was the brightest when the door was opened, but without the hint from the sketches, even if we knew the 6-digit code, we would have had to search the room to get the numbers. At this time, the safe was really opened. There were 2 things inside, a key and a card. I miscalculated, Feng Bujue said after reading the attributes of the 2 items. What's wrong? Wang Tanji seemed to be influenced by his calmness. He had calmed down, and his terror points had returned to 3%. We will need the key soon, but this... Feng Bujue handed the card to Wang Tanji. Name, Explosive Fist, Skill Card Attribute. Active, disappears after 2 uses. Skill type, Fighting. Effect, explode after hitting the target, inflicting fire attribute damage. Consumption, 50 stamina. Learning requirement, fighting mastery F remark. Boom. I thought the reward would be a piece of equipment, but it turned out to be a skill, Feng Bujua said. Let's not talk about the equipment and skill for now. Brother Bujua, how did you know there would be a reward? Wang Tanji asked. Isn't it obvious? Even though this mode does not give any additional rewards other than EXP to ensure the gameplay, the scenario still provides the players with 2 ways to clear the scenario, Feng Bujua explained. We are now on the path of puzzle solving and not brute force. He held the key in his hand and led Wang Tanji out of the second room. For players who are not on the path of puzzle solving, as long as they can overcome their fear, face the enemy calmly, and fight efficiently, they will be able to increase their mastery level. As the character's level increases, the number of combat skills and tactics will increase, and they will be able to gain skill points in battle. Our game style focuses on increasing the overall efficiency of the game and not purely on combat efficiency. Through puzzle solving, we can lower the difficulty of the scenario, reduce the proportion of combat, and gain a better grasp of the scenario. However, those who play this way will fall behind in terms of mastery level, and the system will compensate them in other ways. Normally, it will be more skill points. Wang Tanji understood what Feng Bujua meant, and he added, but there is no skill points to be gained from the training mode. So if the players choose to solve puzzles, they will be able to gain items from the scenario as a form of compensation. Correct. Feng Bujua tried the door of the third room. As he expected, the door was locked. He used the key in his hand to open it, and it matched. After the door was opened, the key disappeared. The third room was very clean. Leaning against the wall, there was a study table, and there was a notebook on it. By the way, how many masteries have you unlocked? Feng Bujua asked as he picked up the notebook. My fighting and general mastery are both F, Brother Bujua. What about you? I've only unlocked general mastery. Feng Bujua flipped through the notebook. Under what circumstances did you unlock your fighting mastery? I was ambushed by a few monkey-like creatures during the tutorial. After killing them, the system told me that I've unlocked level F fighting mastery. Wang Tanji recalled. But the general mastery level only appeared after the tutorial was over. I see. Looks like I'll have to find a chance to unlock all 6 masteries first, Feng Bujua said darkly. He then turned back to tell Wang Tanji, when you got the skill tab in your menu appeared as well, right? Since you've met the requirements, you'd better equip that skill card. It might come in handy later. This was the first time Feng Bujua had picked up a skill card. When he looked at its attribute, the system had told him that the skill tab had been unlocked. In Thriller Paradise, the character's skill tab had 12 slots, and they could only be adjusted before the scenario started. In other words, no matter how many skills a character had, when they entered a scenario, they could only equip 12 skills. Furthermore, for a skill card that had been equipped, whether it had been used or not, it would be bound to the character and could not be traded. Therefore, if a player obtained a skill card and wanted to sell it, they had to place it inside their inventory and could not equip it in their skill tab. Once equipped, the card would disappear, and the skill would turn into a set of data in the player's menu. Another setting was that when a skill card was an item, it could only be taken out of the scenario and could not be brought in. This was to prevent players from carrying a bunch of spare skill cards into the scenario when they already had 12 skills. However, there were a few exceptions. For example, if a player picked up a new skill card in the scenario and fulfilled the learning requirement, their skill tab would be full. In that case, they could use the newly picked card to replace an already equipped skill, but the replaced skill would need to return to the login lobby to equip it. Other than that, there were some special skill cards that existed in the form of items like stone tablets and boxes. They could be brought in and out of the scenario. It did appear, but why does it say that the skill will disappear after 2 uses? Wang Tanji was confused. Obviously, Chunge had not read the game manual to ask such a question. Feng Bujua flipped through the notebook with relish as he replied, the attribute of the skill card is the key. Skills can be separated into active and passive types. Active ones are permanent mastery, limited time, and consumable based on usage, and passive ones are permanent mastery and limited time. He thought about it for a few seconds. The card you have is consumable based on usage. After 2 uses, the skill will be gone. That sounds like a scam. Wang Tanji might have said that, but he still followed Feng Bujue's instructions and equipped the skill. No, that makes sense, Feng Bujue said. With your current stamina points, you can only throw 2 punches at full health. If you use it when there's a chance and the conditions are right, at least in this scenario, you won't need to throw a 3rd punch. In fact, you might not even need to throw a punch. He paused. Furthermore, if it was a permanent or limited time version, the learning requirement and consumption would not be so low. It might require a higher fighting mastery level and a higher consumption of stamina points. Otherwise, this skill thing would be too cheap. It's like if a level 50 marksmanship player casually equipped a permanent fist technique. If that skill could be used at level F and only consumed 50 stamina points, then he would be able to use 100 consecutive shots just like that. How would that work? Wang Tanji thought he had a point. You have a point. If you give me a fighting mastery level F skill, but the consumption is 101 stamina points, then there's a problem with the design of this game. Oh, I have to remind you, mastery level F, meaning that the success rate of activating the active skill of that element is only 20%. Therefore, when a low-level character obtains a skill, whether they can activate it or not depends on luck, Feng Bujue said. That's still a scam. That's why I was looking forward to finding equipment. I went to the official website and saw that the closed beta had just started in the morning, but the guides were already out in the afternoon. There were a few guys who were already over level 10 on the forum who said that equipment was the biggest improvement for a character at low levels, but low-level equipment above excellent is extremely rare. Feng Bujue was multitasking. As he chatted, he almost finished reading the notebook. It's probably because the game transitions to level 10 very quickly, and if the player has good equipment at low level, they can easily clear the game without solving puzzles. Therefore, the game doesn't provide that kind of powerful low-level equipment. He closed his notebook. Also, after level 10, low-level excellent equipment will become tasteless, but it's a pity to throw it away. The exchange isn't open now, so it'll only take up more space in the bag. Feng Bujue suddenly said, I've miscalculated. What's wrong? Wang Tanji panicked. He picked up the fruit knife and turned to look at the corridor outside the room. However, other than the bloody handprint on the wall, he did not see anything out of the ordinary. Speaking of which, if there's anything like opening treasure chests in the future, you should be the one to do it. I only need to tell you the password or the method, Feng Bujue said. TSK. I thought you were going to say something. Wang Tanji said. Character is nothing. It's just a probability. Do you think you'll get trash? I really want to go outside the corridor to pick up a rock and beat you to death. Okay, I was wrong. Feng Bujue placed the notebook in his inventory and said, Let's go. I'll tell you the story of this scenario as we walk. Chapter 15. January 10th. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed what this child did. The spoon floated up and was twisted into other shapes by him. January 13th. He said that he felt people watching him. Many, many people. And he said that he was afraid. January 16th. He didn't seem to be afraid anymore. Sometimes he would smile, but he became quiet. January 17th. All the test results were normal. None of the 6 of us could explain what happened to this child. January 19th, he started to draw. Even though his parents said that he had never shown any talent in drawing, he could draw very realistic sketches. January 22nd, he kept asking for paper and pencils, drawing without rest. He only drew people's faces, and the faces in the drawings changed from normal to strange and scary. January 25th, faces painted with blood appeared on the wall. We found the body of a sparrow on the floor of his ward. His hands were clean, and this made me uneasy. I remember the spoon. January 26th, all the windows in the corridor disappeared, leaving only the walls. The surveillance footage from the night before only captured a blurry image. I don't know who to ask for help. The police? They will think I'm crazy and lock me up. January 30th, Richard went missing. The other 5 of us became very uneasy. More blood faces appeared on the wall, and this time we didn't even find. I don't know his body. January 31st, I have to leave this place. I should ask for leave until this child dies of illness. No, it's better to resign. February 1st, I don't think I can escape. There is no way out of this building. If anyone sees this notebook, please remember what I said. He is afraid of smear. Kill him if you have the chance. Don't hesitate. Otherwise, you'll be the one who dies. Feng Bujue and Wang Tanji turned the corner together. The corridor ahead was still very bright, but there was no door this time. There were only white walls on both sides, and a few dozen meters ahead, there was another T-junction. The two moved forward carefully. Feng Bujue repeated the content of the notebook. He tried to make it sound less scary, but it still scared Xiao Tan so much that his face blanched, and goosebumps rose all over his body. We are not facing ghosts, but children with superpowers who have been mentally corrupted after they are seriously ill, Feng Bujue concluded. At least, that is the setting of this scenario. How is that going to help? Wang Tanji's tone showed that he was still under a lot of pressure. First of all, psychologically, once you know that the other party is a human, I think your fear will lessen slightly. Feng Bujue answered. Secondly, we know that he has a physical body, and we can go up and kill him. Hey, do you think the person who wrote the notebook and the other victims in this scenario have not tried this before? Wang Tanji was panicking. There are more than two of them, right? Do they know how to use explosive punch? Feng Bujue asked. Brother Ju, I have a question. If we don't find this skill, or neither of us has unlocked our fighting mastery, or if we don't solve the puzzle at all, what will happen? Then, after we encounter him, we will be faced with a choice, Feng Bujue said. To fight him or to run. He thought about it for a few seconds before continuing. If we haven't solved the puzzle, we will have to make the choice based on our interaction with him, like the loss of life points after we are injured. With the threat of fear and death, the difficulty will be on the higher side. But after understanding the scenario, even without any contact, I can basically confirm that, with our fighting power, the only choice is to run. If we fight him, we will definitely die. So, I believe, one of the ways to clear this scenario should be to escape from the scenario. Then, doesn't that mean the danger we are in now is the same as if we have not solved the puzzle? Wang Tanji asked. No, there's a difference. At least, in the second room, you gained a skill. Feng Bujue said. In the third room, we found out about his weakness. So, whether we choose to kill him or run, the success rate has increased considerably. My 20% skill aside, didn't you say that the sentence about his weakness was covered up by a blood stain? The system has arranged a very simple analysis here. Using the context of the notebook, it analyzed the series of actions that the child has done. Removing the unimportant details or parts that might confuse us, the content of this handwriting is as clear as the monster file. When Feng Bujue said that, they turned another corner, and a large hall appeared before them. The ceiling was higher, and the lighting was good, but they were still surrounded by walls. On the 10th of January, telekinesis. On the 16th of January, personality mutation. On the 19th of January, abnormal instinct awakening. On the 25th of January, he can use his mind to influence living creatures. On the 30th of January, he can deal with large living creatures, in other words, humans. On the 1st of February, he can kill like a god. Feng Bujue analyzed the situation calmly. And the hint about his weakness, on the 26th of January, and based on what we have seen so far, he is afraid of sunlight. But this place is... Before Wang Tanji could say the word bright, Feng Bujue interrupted him. It's sunlight, not light. Feng Bujue explained. When we entered the first room that looked like a sick room, I felt something was off. The gory environment aside, the sick room and its corresponding corridor had no windows. This did not match the most basic architectural knowledge. At the time, I suspected that this building was underground. Then, I realized that the second and third rooms had no windows as well. Why? He paused for half a second. I can understand the creepiness of these rooms. After all, this place in this scenario is probably a hospital. Obviously, there is a spatial distortion, and we might see anything after we open the door. But after reading the notes, I understood that this was a hint. He pointed at the light above them. Actually, these lights are also a hint. He is afraid of sunlight, but why would he need light? There are only two possibilities. The first is that he also needs light to move around, so he can't see anything in the dark like us. The second is that he's afraid of both sunlight and darkness because there are things staring at him in the dark. Suddenly, the girlish laughter that the two had heard earlier appeared again, and it came from not far away from them. At that moment, they knew very well that the source of the laughter was actually a boy, and he was not a spirit, but a child who liked to use blood to paint. However, even though they had changed their perspective and built up a psychological defense, Wang Tanji's heart raced, and his breathing became heavy. His hands gripped the fruit knife so tightly that his palms were sweating. Feng Bujue said, "Put the knife away. There's no need for it." "Brother Juju, you have—" "Yes, I have an idea." Feng Bujue pointed down the hall. "Use your skill to attack the middle of that wall." As he finished, the little boy, who was the scenario's boss, appeared without warning. He stood about 3 meters away from them. He was wearing a patient's garb, and even under the light, there was a layer of shadow on his body and face. At the same time, the walls, ceiling, and floor of the hall were instantly covered with countless bloody faces. Even the lights turned red. This scene was enough to make a man scream, but Feng Bujue did not hesitate for even a second. He rushed toward the boy who was about 2 meters tall. "Quick, attack the wall." Wang Tanji jumped up and ran in the direction that Feng Bujue had pointed out. Actually, his initial jump was due to fear. He only took a few steps before he felt weak in his legs. He turned back to look and saw that before Feng Bujue could touch the boy, he was bounced back by an invisible force. It was like he had rammed into a moving car, and he coughed out a mouthful of blood. Even though it looked ridiculous, this was ultimately a game. The players did not need to experience pain that was similar to real life. In Thriller Paradise, no matter how heavy the damage was, even if they were run over by a train, the pain threshold for the players was about the same as being hit by a hammer. When Wang Tanji saw this, he tried his best to run toward the wall. The boy obviously noticed what he was doing, but this time, the boy did not teleport. Instead, he chased after him. His speed was not something a child could achieve, and his running posture was strange. He was like a marionette being pulled by strings. Suddenly, a hand grabbed the boy's ankle. Our boss lowered his head to look and realized that it was Feng Bujue. He climbed up from the ground and stubbornly chased after him to slow him down. After all, Feng Bujue had the advantage in terms of size. No matter how fast a 2-meter target could run, he would be able to catch up in a short distance. At the same time, Wang Tanji activated his skill. His right fist was covered in orange light, and he punched at the wall. Even though the skill success rate was only 20%, he was punching a wall that was hard to miss. Furthermore, his luck was not bad, so this attack was a success. There was an explosion on the wall, and a large hole about 1 meter in diameter was blasted open. Unusually strong sunlight shone in from outside. At that moment, all the blood faces in the hall disappeared. The boy retreated in a panic, trying to get as far away from the sunlight as he could. But he could not escape, because Feng Bujue was still holding his ankle. That one hit managed to take out 84% of my life points. Now it's my turn. Feng Bujue stood up, and with a pull, the boss fell to the ground. By then, the boy had lost all ability to resist. Feng Bujue used his free hand to wipe the blood from his lips. He grabbed the boy's leg and dragged him toward the light. This should be a very strong boss. Even if you use your skill on him and hit him, I'm afraid he might not die from that one hit. Wang Tanji sighed in relief. What if I failed to break down the wall, or there was another corridor outside the wall? What should I do? If there was darkness outside the wall, you would hide in the darkness. If there was a corridor outside the wall, you would enter it and continue to run. If you failed to break down the wall, you would find another way to escape, Feng Bujue said as he walked. I'm still quite confident, and that is why I allowed you to use your skill. In this kind of hospital lobby, just by looking at the overall layout, you can tell where the front door was originally. Look, there are corridors on both sides of us. Even though the one behind me is also blocked by the wall, you can still see that it used to be a registration window. As he spoke, he picked up the boss and exposed him to the sunlight. Brother Bujua, don't you think that is a bit cruel? Wang Tanji looked at the boy who was covering his eyes in pain, and his body was curled into a ball. You're right, I have crossed the line, Feng Bujue replied, but he did not stop moving. This was how he had been since he was young, accepting humility and refusing to change. I can release him now and have him hide inside the hospital. The two of us can escape through this hole, and the scenario should be completed. Feng Bujue said, but like I said, based on my analysis, this is a very powerful boss. Even though we have explored the scenario to a very high completion rate, it will be difficult to defeat him directly. If we kill him and clear the scenario, the EXP gained should be much higher than if we run away. Since when do you care about EXP when playing games? Wang Tanji asked. Feng Bujue pouted and pushed the boss further into the sunlight. Now, I have at least 3 reasons to enjoy this game of Thriller Paradise. First, as the saying goes, the wool comes from a sheep's back. I wish to earn back the investment in the gaming hub through the game itself. Second, these random scenarios are not bad. According to the official description, they are generated by the system using a large database and the memory fragments of countless players. In the future team survival mode, there will be more complicated stories and settings, so I can collect materials through the game. Third, I want to find ways to recover the fear. At this point, Feng Bujue raised his hand, snapped his fingers, and curled his finger. Wang Tanji naturally understood what he meant and passed him a fruit knife. Then, let's see the EXP gained from killing the boss. Feng Bujue accepted the knife and stabbed forward. Chapter 16. Completion of Special and Hidden Quests. 0. Unlocked Worldview. None. Time of Terror Points increase. 0. Highest Terror Points. 0%. Average Terror Points. 0%. Your terror rating is Embodiment of Valor. There are no additional rewards for this mode. Calculation complete. Please continue. Here, it was time to explain some of the calculation settings for multiplayer mode. In Thriller Paradise, the number of monsters killed by the player would not affect the EXP gained. All the EXP would be calculated after the scenario ended. Normally, as long as the player did not create too much of a hindrance to the progress of the scenario, the EXP gained by each survivor would be the same. Unless the player's performance was really that of a pig-like teammate, then the system would deduct some EXP from the player during the calculation. This was to limit the problem of kill stealing and excessive damage output. Some players would use extremely exaggerated methods to attack a monster in order to ensure that the items on the monster would belong to them and their share of experience. It was as if they had to use a rocket launcher to kill a dog, just to deal more damage faster than their teammates. This was not only personal behavior, but also a waste of the team's resources. However, this setting created another problem. Since the EXP was the same, those who killed more monsters would only waste life points and stamina points, causing the player's motivation to fight to decrease. Actually, that was not the case. Players who were hardworking and good at fighting would be rewarded with skill points. This would be explained later. Other than the EXP gained from killing monsters, Thriller Paradise did not even have the concept of loot. For example, if a mummy died, it would definitely not drop a sword, a shield, or even a gun. If you really wanted to get something from a mummy, it would be a rotten bandage or dried up muscle. Just that, players had to tear it off with their own hands. After tearing it off and holding it in their hands, the system would give you an item description. As for how much of a scam it was, please refer to the stone. Obtaining equipment in this game was a very interesting thing. Other than certain storage areas that could be accessed through solving puzzles, most of the time, non-main quest items, including equipment, had to be found by the player. For example, there was a Spider-Man bodysuit in a shop window on the street. It might be completely useless, or it might be an excellent equipment with attributes. Another example was wandering around in a sewer. You might be able to find a series of weapons, such as dual sabers, thorns, nunchaku, and long sticks. In conclusion, to obtain equipment in a scenario, one needed intelligence, luck, and hard work. The first two were not to be forced, and the third was to spend more time searching. Of course, searching required the support of fighting ability. Normally, a scenario would not give the players too much free time to move around. Furthermore, the players had to have enough stamina points to move around. With regard to the method of acquiring equipment outside the scenario, there was no such thing in the closed beta, but when the market opened, one could purchase equipment using game coins and skill points. There was only to talk about the game coins. Like most games, they could be used to buy shop goods provided by the game, or to bid on the goods put up by other players in the auction house. They could also be used for direct transactions. Skill points, on the other hand, were a relatively rare currency. Skill points could not be traded between players, nor could they be traded in the exchange. Skill points could only be used in one place, the Thriller Box. That was the name of the system's special shop. No one knew why it was named that way. Perhaps the system thought that the players would be shocked when they saw the items inside. Skill points could be used to purchase two types of items inside the Thriller Box. The first was game coins, which the players could exchange at a 1-to-10 ratio. The second was items that could not be taken out of the scenario, like the blood zombies must-die that Feng Bujue had obtained in the beginner's tutorial. Obviously, the use of this sword in his tutorial was similar to a plot item. It was designed to help him defeat the blood zombies that he was unable to defeat at the time. Therefore, at the time, there was no level or mastery restriction on the sword, and it could not be taken out of the scenario. Similar equipment, items, skills, and so on would not disappear from the system's database after the scenario ended. Even though the players could not take these items out of the scenario, they would enter a place that was similar to a recycle bin, and that place was the Thriller Box. These items would be sold there, and they could only be purchased with skill points. There would be corresponding changes to their attributes. For example, the usage requirements of the equipment would be adjusted, and some special effects that were only applicable to certain scenarios would be changed. Most of the skill cards would become permanent, and of course, the learning requirements would increase as well. The Thriller Box was not open during the closed beta because the recycle bin was still quite empty. After the open beta started, there would be a large influx of players, so they had to accumulate a certain amount of items during this period. After the store was officially opened, to prevent the total number of items from affecting the browsing experience, the items that were not sold after 7 days in real life would be completely deleted by the system. The level cap for the closed beta was 20. As a game that required players to queue up to clear the scenario, level was not much of an advantage, and game coins could be bought with money. Therefore, the biggest advantage the closed beta players had was undeniably the accumulated skill points. The first batch of products after the release of Thriller Box could only be purchased by players who had accumulated skill points. That was why they had priority in purchasing them. Speaking up to this point, it was easier to explain the previous question about fighting actively, fighting for skill points. Not everyone was good at solving puzzles, but fighting was something that everyone could participate in. The setting of skill points was that any action that increased the efficiency of the game would reward skill points. Not only could this be reflected in solving puzzles, there were also opportunities to obtain skill points in combat. For example, killing with high returns and low losses, consecutive kills, group kills, completing special kills with the conditions of the scene, and so on. Using Feng Bujue's beginner's tutorial as an example, if he did not look for the key inside the square room, but chose to kick the door, he would gain skill points as well. The key was how he kicked the door. Most people would face the door and use the bottom of their feet to kick the door. Many characters in movies did that as well. Actually, that was the most tiring method. Using a side kick or a roundhouse kick would save a lot of energy. At the time, if Feng Bujue had used the more efficient method to kick the door, he would have gained skill points as well. Perhaps it would not have been as much as solving puzzles, but at least he would have gained around 10 skill points. These were two different ways of playing, two different paths of growth. Players who liked to reason could rely on solving puzzles and worldviews to gain a lot of skill points. Players who liked to fight could train their fighting skills and gain skill points through violence. Under normal circumstances, it was the combat type who would gain more skill points. Even if a puzzle solver was at the last step, as long as they did not solve the puzzle, they would not gain any skill points. Players who liked to fight could accumulate skill points bit by bit. But no matter how one played, the biggest taboo in this game was brainless behavior. The scary elements were designed to make people lose their cool and do something like using a rocket launcher to kill a dog. In Thriller Paradise, the most logical way of fighting would yield the most rewards. If you use a rocket launcher, you would only get a pile of trash, but if you use the dog-beating stick technique, you would get a homemade fur and a pot of stew. Feng Bujue returned to the login lobby to check the data. When he opened the menu again, he realized that he had risen to level 4. His stamina points had increased to 400,400, and his current EXP was 0/400. It looked like the leveling up requirement in this game was not that high. At least for now, it was still increasing by 100 per level, which was similar to the increase in stamina points. However, the official website did not provide the actual EXP requirement for each level, and the players who wrote the guides did not mention this. This meant that the higher the level, the higher the EXP requirement. Brother Bujue, I've reached level 3, and I'm only 30 EXP away from level 4. Wang Tanji's voice came from the communicator. I know. Actually, Feng Bujue had already calculated Xiao Tan's EXP. Compared to him, the difference was only the 30 skill points from the tutorial. If we do team training again, we should all reach level 5. But this mode is not worth it. Once we reach level 5, we naturally have to play team survival mode. That is the core of this game. But now we are seriously lacking in equipment. We don't even have normal equipment, much less good equipment. If we join a team like this, we might drag others down. Huh? Team? Drag others down? Who? Wang Tanji was confused. Kid, you sure don't read the game manual, Feng Bujue explained. The number of players in team survival mode is random from 2 to 6. We don't enter the scenario directly, but queue up to enter it. If we form a group of 6, it won't be a problem. But we're a team of 2. If we don't run into a 2-man scenario, we'll need to cooperate with others in a 3-man, 4-man, 5-man, or 6-man scenario. If we're too weak, we might die in the middle of the scenario. Even if others clear the scenario successfully, we'll only get the corresponding EXP based on our contribution before the game is over. We won't get the reward after we clear the scenario. Furthermore, in that mode, there is the problem of splitting the loot. For players who are not in a team, the equipment and skills that they find will belong to whoever finds them. Unless there is something that cannot be taken out of the scenario and cannot be used by oneself, no one will easily share the equipment or skills that they find. That was human nature. For some people, even if they found something that was of little value and could not be sold at the market, they would only earn some game coins by selling it to the system, so they would not give it away to other players for free. You have to give them something in exchange to make them feel like they've earned something. Wang Tanji heard that and added, in any case, if we don't make use of this opportunity to increase our character's power, it'll be very difficult after level 5. If we don't unlock the mastery level, even if people want to give us the equipment or skills that they replace as a favor, we won't be able to use them. Feng Bujue said, it's good that you understand. Then, we'll disband the team and start the solo survival mode. You've said so much because you're planning to ditch me and do it alone. Feng Bujue laughed and replied, in the group training mode earlier, we should have completed it above our expectations. Theoretically speaking, we shouldn't have gotten that much EXP. I've been thinking this boss was not made for us to kill, so the chance of clearing the scenario by killing it is very small. Normally, if we clear the scenario by escaping, we'll only get around 300 EXP. But since our level has increased faster than expected, it's best if we each complete a solo survival mode to reach level 5. After that, our strength should increase significantly, and we should be able to unlock at least 1 or 2 masteries and get 1 or 2 equipment or skills. Okay, then we'll go solo first. You can see my in-game status in your friend list, right? Wang Tanji asked. Yes, you can, Feng Bujue replied. In any case, whoever finishes it first will wait for the other. If there are no accidents, and at most 1 hour, we'll all reach level 5, and then we can try out the legendary team survival mode. Chapter 17. After the two came to an agreement, they separated from each other. Feng Bujue could still see Wang Tanji's current status in his friend list. It soon changed from free to in-game, but the specific mode was not shown. This was to ensure that the player's information would not be leaked. Currently, there were only 3 social options in Thriller Paradise, which were recent players, friends, and blacklist. In the scenario, one could not submit friend requests or blacklist people. That could only be done in the login lobby. How to politely reject others had always been a problem in social media, and the Dream Company had spent a lot of effort on this problem. Even though most gaming hubs had the ability to modify one's appearance, one did not need to log into a specific game to use this function. Feng Bujue did not use it because he did not care about that, and the man was quite vain to begin with. Even though he knew that the beautiful players in the game might not be real beauties, the chance of female players receiving friend requests was still quite high. There was also the phenomenon of bootlicking. In the future, Feng Bujue would often encounter this situation. After the scenario ended, he would receive many friend requests. Of course, this was to be expected. Compared to meeting uncertain teammates, people would naturally prefer to play with stronger players because it would greatly reduce the difficulty of the game. Regardless of whether it was the desire to hunt for women, the attempt to hug her thigh, or simply to make friends, being rejected was always an embarrassing thing. The Dream Company came up with this solution. The players could only submit friend requests in the login lobby. If they were rejected, only the 2 of them would know. Furthermore, by then, the scenario would have ended, and the players would not do anything that would affect the clearing of the scenario due to emotional dissatisfaction. Only players who were friends could communicate through the login lobby like a phone call. However, video communication was not provided, so others would not be able to see the expression on one's face. If 2 players were not friends, they could only communicate through the mail function. Within 24 hours in real life, one party could only send 3 consecutive mail messages to the other party. If the other party did not reply, the 4th mail would not be sent. Each mail could have no more than 1,000 words, and the content was monitored by the system. Threatening and harassing mail would be intercepted by the system, and the system would write an email to the recipient saying that a player had sent you a threatening letter or a player had sent you a letter to harass you. Would you like to add the player to the blacklist? Once a player added a player to the blacklist, it meant that the player had been completely blocked. In the future, no matter what mode they queued in, they would not meet the player, and they would not receive any mail from the player. If a party invited a player who was on the blacklist, the system would give them an additional notification before they accepted the party. With this series of restrictions, to prevent the players from interacting with people they really did not want to interact with, Dream Incorporated had done everything they could. Of course, the situation in reality was relatively peaceful. Most players wouldn't try anything else after their friend requests were rejected. They would just move on to the next round of the game. If he wrote an email mocking the other party for being too high to reach, he would only be blacklisted. As the saying goes, mountains and rivers will meet again. Playing games was not for the sake of looking for trouble. Feng Bujue was not in a hurry to start a new game. He first checked his status and noticed that his mastery level was still general ability. The other 5 options were still shadowed. According to the game's information, the 6 masteries were fighting, shooting, workmanship, sleuthing, medic, a general ability. Mastery was the requirement to activate and learn a skill, and it was the core of a character's power. Even though Feng Bujue was not leaning toward the martial arts path, it was impossible for him to not know anything about masteries. He planned to unlock as many masteries as he could in the upcoming scenarios, preferably workmanship or sleuthing. During the closed beta, when the player's combat ability was low, avoiding direct combat was the best way to clear the game. The other thing was to check the items in his inventory. The stack of sketches could not be taken out of the scenario, so naturally they had disappeared. The syringe that he had found earlier was still there. Item name: disposable syringe. Item type: consumable. Quality: normal. Function: extract or inject liquid. Remark: stay away from drugs and cherish your life. Feng Bujue's inventory was empty, and the login lobby could store 30 items. Currently, there was no problem with storage. He thought that this might be useful, so he took it with him. At the very least, this thing was more reliable than a rock. Looking at his current situation, he had neither equipment nor skills. There were many things that he needed to do in this solo mode. If he did not gain anything, it would be harder after level 5. By then, the training mode would be closed, and the difficulty of solo mode would increase as his level increased. Then, he would really become a burden to his teammates. Feng Bujue had high hopes for the upcoming scenario. Based on his thinking, the scarier the scenario, the better. As long as the reward was proportional to the difficulty, he would accept it. Feng Bujue, Level 4. Please select the game mode that you wish to join. You have selected Solo Survival Mode, Normal. Please confirm. Confirmed. Generating scenario. Downloading. Please wait. After Feng Bujue selected the mode, he thought that the elevator would move first, and he would enter the scenario as soon as he opened the door, but this time, he was transported. His vision turned dark, and his feet left the ground. He felt like he was floating in the air, and there was no support. Welcome to Thriller Paradise appeared in his ears again. This time, the voice changed again. It sounded like a normal middle-aged woman. It looked like this line had nothing to do with the content of the script. Every time, a random human voice would appear, and with a deliberate tone, they would say the same thing. Download complete. You're currently in Solo Survival Mode, Normal. A scenario introduction is provided in this mode, and there's a chance to trigger hidden side missions and special world building. Reward for clearing the scenario. Randomly draw a learnable skill card. Playing the scenario introduction soon. The game will start after that. The dark background before Feng Bujue turned into a picture. It looked like a room or the corner of a warehouse. Due to the angle of the picture, he could only see a corner, and it was hard to tell how big the room was. The wall should be made of metal, not wood. There was no paint or wallpaper, or perhaps the paint had faded. The floor was cement, and there was no furniture in the picture. Then, the caption appeared before his eyes, and the familiar system voice started to explain. Your name is Arthur Siegel, a famous photographer. You have a happy family, a good job, and a satisfactory social status. Until one Christmas night, you woke up from your coma and found yourself in an unfamiliar warehouse. The last thing you remembered was going to the parking lot to get your car after work. The plot was not long, and the information provided was limited. After reading it, Feng Bujue was transported to the location in the picture with a flash of white light. He sat on the ground with his back leaning against the wall. Before he could get a good look at the warehouse, he lowered his head subconsciously because he noticed that he was holding something in his left hand, a silver Walkman. This kind of portable cassette player was already obsolete in 2055. Feng Bujue had not seen the real thing before. He had only seen it in a movie, and the current situation reminded him of that movie. He pressed the play button, and a hoarse male voice spoke. It was in English, and the first sentence was enough for Feng Bujue to understand the basic setting of the scenario. Hello, Arthur. I wish to play a game with you. Chapter 18. You love your job, a job that requires a strong sense of duty and dedication. You've used your camera to record many gory realities and urge people to pick up their conscience. But do you care about that? Are you a hypocrite hiding behind a mask of falsehood or a real fighter? At this moment, some kind of poison is spreading inside your body, eating away at your life. When you wake up, the increase in your metabolism will speed up this process. You have 40 minutes to find the only exit in this place. Let's see if the man who has been hiding behind the camera can use his conscience to return to his family. Life or death. Make your choice. When Feng Bujue was halfway through, he had already stood up to observe his surroundings. He was still wearing the default black t-shirt and pants. Based on the trick he had seen in movies, he purposely checked his pockets, but they were still empty. The items inside his inventory had not changed, only the plastic syringe. F*CK, your choice. Feng Bujue cursed after he finished listening to the recording. After all, he was in solo mode, and the system did not stop him from cursing. Then, He studied the Walkman's attributes from a menu. Item name: Walkman with built-in cassette tape. Item type: plot. Item: rarity. Broken. Function: play the recording from the cassette can be taken out of the scenario. No remark. You'd better believe the content of the cassette tape. This was probably another plot item that could only be used once. Even though Fong Bujue had memorized every single word in the recording, for the sake of caution, he listened to it again. He did not mind the extra 1 or 2 minutes. After listening to it for the second time, he placed the Walkman inside his inventory. Considering the fact that there might be more than one cassette tape in this scenario, it was safer to bring it with him. The space before him was spacious. The ceiling was about 12 meters or more above the ground. Near the ceiling, there were some large ventilation fans. He could see the sun shining in from outside, but there was nothing to climb. The ceiling of the warehouse was arched, and when he lifted his head, he could see many supports that were horizontal to the ground. There were lights on the supports, and they were all on. The wall was very sturdy. The surface was a layer of metal, or perhaps it was a brick wall. But no matter what it was, Fong Bujue obviously couldn't break it open and escape. The system would not create a scenario that would end in 2 to 3 minutes. If Fong Bujue had 2 explosive fists that had not been used and his fighting mastery had reached F, then the system would have changed the format of the scenario or made the walls of the storage room twice as thick as they were now. This was because, in theory, Fong Bujue could have used a skill to escape. Although the success rate of each punch was only 20%, and he wasn't sure how thick the wall was before the first punch, it was still theoretically possible. When the system generated the scenario, it would eliminate that possibility. For example, Wang Tanji would not run into such a scenario. In conclusion, as long as the scenario relied on the character's initial state to clear the scenario, no matter how small the chance was, the system would not generate such a scenario. Fong Bujue walked forward. There were many containers in the middle of the storage room. The tallest one was stacked up to 3 layers high, but there was still quite a distance from the roof. The containers were placed end to end, and they were arranged closely together. They formed the only path before Fong Bujue. This is a bad feeling. Fong Bujue naturally did not mean that he was afraid. He just did not have high hopes for the reward that he would get from the scenario. He believed that even for a normal person, this kind of scenario that was taken from Saw would not cause too much of fluctuation in their terror points. In a killing game like Saw, the key to creating terror was time. In these games, the threat was visible, and the fear would increase with the approach of death. There was no sudden situation that would cause the player's terror points to skyrocket. Furthermore, in the movies, the player's escape method was often self-mutilation. The combination of physical pain and the lack of time would cause the player to fail. However, for the players in Thriller Paradise, the most they would suffer was the pain of a hammer hitting their finger. Even if that level of pain was applied to every bone in their body at the same time, they could grit their teeth and endure it. Furthermore, those who had watched the series would know that the purpose of Saw was not to kill, but to save. He used pain to save those who did not cherish life, to make them reevaluate life and appreciate the value of life. As long as they followed the rules of the game and dared to harm themselves, there would be a way to survive. Considering these factors, Fong Bujue confirmed that 80% of the difficulty of the scenario was focused on puzzle solving. The system would not create a scenario where the player would definitely lose, or at least that was not possible in the various modes of normal difficulty. The difficulty of all the scenarios was set by the system based on the player's character ability. Only in multiplayer mode would the difficulty be increased. Facing Fong Bujue, whose character ability was about the same as when he was level 1 other than his stamina points, the system could only give him such a scenario. With his current condition, it was impossible for him to fight. If the scenario spawned a monster or boss that suited a level 4 player, then he would not be able to defeat it alone. Therefore, the way to clear the scenario became clear. Either you solve the puzzle, or, like the players in the movies, use your life points to tank the boss and die if you could not hold on any longer. It did not take long for Fong Bujue to follow the path of the containers and come to the side of a wall. There was an arrow painted on the wall, pointing at a door that was blocked by the containers. There was a very narrow gap before the door, and it was just wide enough for one to squeeze through. Fong Bujua looked at the life points and stamina points in the menu. They were almost full. His life points would probably decrease as the poison acted up, but he did not have to worry about his stamina points. He calmed himself down and adjusted his breathing. He knew very well that the moment he opened the door, he would start a game of jigsaw. From this moment on, he had to focus his mind. He took several steps to the side, pushed the door open, and walked into a new room. When he pushed the door open, he heard a click sound. It was obvious that something behind the door frame had been triggered. A few seconds later, the new room lit up. After Fong Bujua stepped into the room, the door closed on its own. It was unclear whether this was part of the mechanism or a modification by the system. There was a very small wooden chair in the middle of the room, and a doll in a black suit was sitting on it. It was holding a newspaper in its hand. The doll was shaped like a child. It had a strange hairstyle, a white face, a black scara, and blood-red pupils. There was a spiral blush on both cheekbones, and its lips were wide and thin, bright red. This face suddenly appeared in front of people in the middle of the night. Perhaps it was quite scary, but at that moment, unless the doll jumped up to bite people, no one would be afraid. "Hello, Arthur. Since you're here, it means that you didn't choose to wait for your death. Then, listen to the rules." The voice recording in the doll's stomach played automatically after the door opened. You should have seen a working machine. Fong Bujue's gaze moved to a machine that was about the size of a washing machine, not far away. On top of the machine, there was a circular opening that was the size of a plate. It was big enough for a person's head to poke in. From the hole, there was the sound of some parts operating. Fong Bujua took a few steps closer to observe. He could see about half a meter away from the circular opening, there were 2 rows of gears. They were tightly fitted in the middle, leaving only a small gap. The 2 rows of gears were turning inward from both sides, like 2 converging waterfalls. Even though it didn't look fast, the torque was very strong. With the power of this machine, it was more than enough to crush wood or even scrap metal. On top of the machine, near the circular opening, there was a countdown timer. The timer was set to 5 minutes, and it was already ticking. Next to the timer, there was a meter. The unit on it was kilograms, and the needle was pointing to 0. This machine can crush objects, and it can also open the door to the next room for you. All you have to do is throw in enough weight. When you put in more than 15 kilograms, the door will open. If you cut off the power or wait for the timer to run out, the machine will stop working. Fong Bujue's gaze moved elsewhere. He was looking for something to throw in. Obviously, other than the small wooden chair and the doll, there was something else. The iron cage is welded to the ground. Inside it is a Tibetan macaque that is deeply anesthetized. Its weight is 10 kilograms. Of course, the first thing you should do is throw in the doll in the chair, but unfortunately, the combined weight of these 2 things is 7.5 kilograms. Fong Bujua picked up the newspaper that the doll was holding. The headline was, "They are not your dinner." The picture below was of a small monkey crawling inside the iron cage, looking outside with a pleading gaze unique to animals. The author of this article was no doubt Arthur Siegel. You have criticized the poachers as worthless and called the people who buy wildlife products as rich executioners. But in your travels, under the guise of interviewing, you have enjoyed many meals with protected animals as the main ingredient. There is more than one fur coat in your wife's closet. You have personally witnessed the killing of these animals, but you have done nothing more than watch from the sidelines. Now you have the chance to experience what it feels like to be a real executioner. Will you use this animal's life in exchange for your own survival? Make your choice, Arthur. The recording stopped there. Fong Bujua was still reading the newspaper. His old habit was acting up again. He wanted to finish reading this article that was made up by the system. Chapter 19. This trick might work on female players who are overflowing with love. Fong Bujua moved his gaze away from the newspaper and glanced at the monkey in the cage. If necessary, even in real life, I will not hesitate. Furthermore, this is just a game. He put down the newspaper and seemed to have lost interest in the content. But since it has given me a more accurate weight, it should be a hint. He walked to the machine, squatted down, and leaned his face close to observe it closely. He walked around the machine and then used his fist to knock on the casing of the machine and used his feet to kick it twice. Obviously, the outer shell of this machine was not just a layer of iron sheet, but a very strong iron plate. The screws at the joints were very tight, and it was impossible to open it with bare hands. It was also impossible to move it with one strength. There were no obvious gaps on the surface of the machine, and the two gauges were fixed firmly. With less than 3 minutes left, it would be futile to try to find a loophole in the machine. Therefore, Fong Bujue went to pull on the iron cage that held the monkey a few more times. It was really welded shut and would not budge. He looked around the room. Other than the four walls, there was nothing else. He walked back to the center of the room, picked up the doll, and sat on the small wooden chair. Because the chair was very small, Fong Bujue sat in a squatting position. If I want to pass through this room without killing the monkey, other than the 5 kilograms of the chair and the doll, I have to find another 5 kilograms of object. He placed his right elbow on his knee, tilted his head, and tapped his forehead with his index finger and middle finger. That Walkman weighs at most 1 kilogram, not to mention the syringe. My clothes and running shoes are restricted by the system, and I can't take them off. I suddenly missed that rock. At least 1 or 2 kilograms. He smiled and said, "Then in this empty room, there's only one thing that can move." He raised his head and looked at the lighting equipment above his head. It was a suspended fluorescent lamp. The lamp tube was about 1 meter long and was embedded in a plastic lamp shell. It was suspended from the ceiling by 2 wires. The wires were wrapped around the 2 wires used for suspension. The ceiling of this room was much lower than the outside, but it was still about 4 meters high. The hanging lights were not close to the ceiling, but they were also not at a height that Fong Bujue could reach. He stood up and stepped onto the wooden chair. He stood on his tiptoes on the small stool and stretched out his arm to measure the distance. His fingertips were still about a foot away from the lamp. This distance was neither too long nor too short, but it was just out of reach. The chair under his feet was very small, and it was very difficult for him to stand on it with his feet together. It was obviously impossible for him to jump up and down and reach out to grab the thing above his head. Time was ticking, and Fong Bujue only had 73 seconds left. After measuring the distance with his hand, he turned back to look at the timer. Then he actually laughed and said to himself, "It's going to be very difficult right from the start." That's exactly what I wanted. After Fong Bujue thought for a moment, his gaze moved back to the doll. He seemed to have thought of a solution. He quickly ran over to pick up the doll. He took off the black suit on the doll and held it in his hand. Then he returned to the wooden chair and stood still. His left hand grabbed one of the sleeves of the suit and swung it up. Although the suit was only a child's size, it was enough to go over the lamp. Fong Bujue raised his right hand and pulled on the other sleeve that went over the lamp. The suit was now like a rein over the horse's mouth. Fong Bujue pulled on both ends with both hands and pulled hard. One of the wires on one side of the lamp was broken. One end of the fluorescent lamp shell was hanging down, and the other end was still hanging by the wire. It swung around under the ceiling like a hanging sausage. Now, Fong Bujue could directly grab the lamp. The lamp had a plastic shell on 3 sides, so he did not have to worry about breaking the glass. Although the room was dark due to the loss of light, it wasn't difficult to find the floating light tube in front of him. After he grabbed the lamp, he used a bit of force and tore the wire on the other end. He held the 1 meter long fluorescent lamp in his hand along with the plastic shell. Since just now, Fong Bujue had been counting the time in his heart. There should be about 35 seconds left. In the darkness, the machine was still running and rumbling. He did not rush toward the sound. Instead, he carefully walked down from the chair and used his feet to find the doll on the floor. After remembering the position of the 2 things, he counted the steps and walked towards the machine. It was easy to reach the machine. He could clearly tell the position of the round mouth just by the sound. Fong Bujue retracted his head and extended the lamp into the machine. The two rows of gears crushed the fluorescent lamp and pushed it down through the gap in the middle. Although some small glass fragments sputtered out during the process, Fong Bujue was prepared and was not hurt at all. After 3/4 of the light tubes entered the machine, he let go of his hand, turned around, and walked in the direction he came from. He counted his steps and walked quickly in the dark. He deliberately controlled his steps, afraid that he would kick something he wanted. He didn't have time to lie on the ground and fumble around in the dark. Unsurprisingly, he gently touched the doll on the floor within 10 steps. Time was tight. Fong Bujue quickly squatted down and grabbed the doll with one hand and the small wooden chair with the other. He turned around and ran towards the machine. This time, he did not have to think about turning back, so his strides were big. He reached the machine in a few seconds and hurriedly threw the doll in. The back of the wooden chair was slightly longer than the diameter of the round mouth. Fong Bujue had already noticed this and kept in mind. If he did not consider this, he would have realized that the small wooden chair was stuck outside the mouth and could not be shoved in. However, Fong Bujue would not make this kind of mistake. Before he pulled the lamp, he had thought of every step in the dark. While the machine was still crushing the doll, he grabbed the back of the wooden chair with one hand and tilted it to the ground. He used his foot to stomp hard on it, and the board of the chair was bent out of shape. This small folded stool could be shoved into the round mouth without any effort. There were only 5 seconds left in his calculation, and the broken wooden chair was successfully shoved into the machine. Almost 3 seconds later, the rumbling of the machine stopped. Due to the darkness, Fong Bujue could not see the countdown timer and the meter. He did not know if he had stopped the game because he had satisfied the 15 kilograms weight, or if the machine had stopped because he ran out of time. The next few seconds were so long and unbearable. Nothing happened. Fong Bujue's heart slowly sank. Was the tube not heavy enough? In real life, this kind of suspended fluorescent lamp would weigh less than 5 kilograms, but the thing that he was holding in his hand earlier obviously weighed more than that. He believed that this was the weight that was purposely set by the game. Could it be that the puzzle-solving method was wrong? The only way to leave this room was to kill the monkey? All of his doubts disappeared with a strange click. The door to the next room opened at this moment. In fact, the mechanism only took about 10 seconds to activate. A ray of light shone through the gap, announcing that the game was still going on. Chapter 20. Seeing the door open, Fong Bujue sighed in relief. He did not hurry to run out. Instead, using the light that shone in from outside the door, he walked to the cage where the monkey was kept. He opened the latch, lifted the door, and carried the unconscious monkey out. Name: sleeping Tibetan macaque type. Plot: item quality. Normal function. Unknown can be taken out of the scenario. Yes remark: a type of monkey with a lively and brave personality. It is now extinct. A plot item, but it says that I can take it out of the scenario. Fong Bujue mumbled. He tried to put the monkey inside his inventory, and he succeeded. Then he walked out of the room. There was a corridor outside the door. The walls were basically made of metal, and the ceiling was still 4 to 5 meters high. The lighting was normal, but there was still no window. There were doors and forks on both sides of the corridor, but they were either locked or blocked by large objects. There was only one real corridor. Occasionally, red arrows would appear on the wall to guide Fong Bujue. After several futile attempts, he knew that he would not find anything useful, so he picked up his pace and followed the arrows. About 7 minutes later, he reached the end of the corridor, and there was another metal door that was painted red. This door did not have a handle, and there was a circular valve in the middle. Fong Bujue walked forward to grab the valve and try to turn it. The resistance was great, and he had to use a lot of strength before he managed to turn it. After turning it half a circle, the door moved, and a gust of cold air seeped out from the gap. Fong Bujue had a bad feeling. When he pushed the door open, he realized that the metal door was very thick, and the room was obviously a sealed freezer. Once he opened the door, a gust of cold air rushed at him. The interior of the room was truly a world of ice and snow. The ground was covered in white frost, and there were signs of ice on the walls. Lifting his head to look, other than the lighting, he could see that there was a pipe that was about 1 meter in diameter at each of the 3 corners of the ceiling. When the door was opened, white snow started to drift out from the pipe. Thankfully, even though the pipe was large, the snow that fell was only sporadic. Fong Bujue took a deep breath and blew hot air into his palms. He rubbed his hands and walked into the room. After he crossed the threshold, he realized that the depth of the floor was not right. The floor was lower than the bottom of the door, and it was not at the same level as the corridor outside the door. Therefore, the thin layer of frost on the floor was actually knee-deep snow. He stepped on it, and his feet sank into the snow. It was so cold that he jumped a few steps, but it was useless. The snow was very soft, and the only way to prevent his feet from sinking into the snow was to increase the surface. Therefore, he knelt down. He did not close the door, but knelt to the opposite wall of the room. There was another door there, but there was no will to open it. There was only an electronic lock that was embedded in the door that required password. There were 4 empty slots for the password on the screen. There was an obvious movable iron plate on the wall next to the door. The iron plate was about 10 centimeters long, square in shape, and there was a small handle on it. When Fong Bujue pulled the iron plate, the iron door that led to the room automatically closed. There was a small space behind the iron plate, and there was a cassette. What he needed to do next was very clear. Fong Bujue took out the cassette and the Walkman that he was carrying. He took out the original cassette and placed it inside his backpack. Then, he placed the new cassette inside and pressed the play button. Merry Christmas, Arthur. This is a day for family reunion. At the same time, the spirit of Christmas also means selfless sacrifice and blessing. As Fong Bujue listened to the recording, he started his second round of detailed observation of the room. He noticed the most eye-catching thing in the room earlier. On one side of the metal wall, there was a piece of newspaper that looked quite new. The wall had obviously been treated. The ice around the newspaper was not serious. Even though it was filled with artificial snow, the humidity in the room was not too high, and the words on the paper were still clear. The most eye-catching headline was "They're no different from us." There was a picture next to it of a group of homeless people huddling around a waste oil barrel for warmth. In the background, it was snowing and the ground was white. Of course, this article was also written by Arthur Siegel. You often attend charity events and appear in front of the camera, but we all know that you have never donated to any organization in private. You have urged people not to discriminate against those who are homeless, but you have never shown any respect to those who are lower in social status than you. Your harshness and snobbery make everyone around you nauseous. You have also spoken up for the elderly, claiming that they need more attention and understanding. But every year, you use employment as an excuse to refuse to spend Thanksgiving and Christmas with your parents. Arthur, you have stood on the moral high ground more than once to criticize the indifference of the world and the unfairness of the system. But your actual actions show that you have no idea what you're talking about. Now, you have a chance to understand how those helpless people get through the difficult times. In this snowy room, there's a piece of cardboard. On the paper is the password to unlock the door. What you have to do is to reach into the snow under your feet to find the piece of paper. Just like how everyone who is freezing on the streets on a snowy night yearns for a wisp of hope. You don't have a time limit. But even if you find something, the best result is that you'll only be able to hold on until dawn. When the recording ended, Fong Bujue was shivering from the cold. The game provided clothing to ensure the player's comfort in an environment with a virtual temperature of more than 20 degrees Celsius. If it was hotter or colder, the player would feel the corresponding physical sensation. The ice cave-like room was clearly below 0 degrees Celsius, and the 3 pipes on the ceiling were still increasing the thickness of the snow at a very slow rate. To ensure the flexibility of his fingers, Fong Bujue breathed into his palm when he exhaled. He quickly went through the recording in his mind, and then he repeated the last sentence to himself. Just like those who are suffering from the cold, once you find something, you will be able to survive until dawn. Based on his speculation, this was the only hint. It was rather vague, but it had to be a sign of something. Fong Bujue stood up again. Everything below his knees was completely frozen. Now, it did not matter if his feet were in the snow because he could not feel the cold anymore. He staggered over to the newspaper and stared intently at the article and the photograph, searching for any possible clue. Fong Bujua knew that now was the best time to search for clues. Physical labor could wait until there was no other way. If he impatiently dug his hands into the snow on the ground, 5 minutes later, even if his fingers didn't break from the cold, his body temperature would drop even more. If he developed into a state where his reaction was slow and his consciousness was hazy, it would be impossible for him to solve the riddle. Something that can keep a homeless man alive until dawn. Fong Bujua said that to focus his attention. A group of people huddling around a bucket, burning trash to keep themselves warm until dawn? No, that's not it. The image of a middle-aged man wearing sunglasses flashed across his mind. That's it. The three treasures of the street, the cardboard box, the dog, and the radio. With that in mind, he started to work. The newspaper was stuck to the wall with 4 small pieces of tape to secure the 4 corners. Fong Bujua tore off the corners as carefully as possible to ensure that the large piece in the middle of the newspaper was not damaged. The dog is impossible unless I build one out of snow. As for the radio, Walkman should be one. As for the cardboard box, Fong Bujua had already removed the newspaper from the wall. Even though the 4 corners were missing small pieces, that did not affect what he was about to do. As mentioned earlier, the newspaper was new, so the creases on it were very clear. A normal person would not fold a newspaper more than twice, but this newspaper had many creases on it. This undoubtedly showed that it had been folded into something before. Fong Bujua reconstructed the newspaper according to the creases. His hands were not frozen, but they were still affected by the extreme cold. In fact, in his game menu, the special status next to his life points already showed the word frozen. Even though the newspaper was missing a corner, the shape that matched the creases perfectly was folded by Fong Bujua, a very small cardboard box. Fong Bujua held it in his hands to study it. He turned it several times before he finally found a series of letters and numbers at a place where the edges of the paper overlapped. The letters on a newspaper could not all be in the same format. Occasionally, there would be different font sizes and styles. For example, the letters used in the title or footnotes would be different from the ones used in the article. Other than that, there was also the issue of case. The series of letters and numbers that Fong Bujua found were all in the same font size and style. The letters were all in capital letters. When the newspaper was open, they were in different positions and pages, but when it was folded, they joined together to form a neat little section. FM 27, 3 megahertz. Fong Bujua read. The band of an amateur radio station. He adjusted the Walkman to listen to the radio. All the frequencies were noisy, and FM 27, 3 was the same. However, after he confirmed the frequency, he turned up the volume and waited patiently. As he expected, after 40 seconds of noise, a hoarse voice said, 9527. Then there was more noise. Fong Bujua rushed to the side of the exit door. As he keyed in the password, he grumbled, "What kind of stupid password is this? Does it mean that lowly people and dogs are not allowed to enter?" As he expected, the password was correct, and the door opened. Fong Bujua scrambled out of the room. When he reached the corridor outside, he rolled on the ground from the cold. He rolled twice before he stood up to do more than 20 squats. During this process, he looked at his status on the menu. His life points had dropped to 67%, but the frozen status would soon disappear in a normal temperature environment. No matter what, coming out like this was less of a loss than crawling on the ground and digging through the snow to find the paper. Fong Bujua had always been unlucky when it came to gaming. For the kind of task that was like finding a needle in a haystack, he would not have found the paper without turning every inch of the room upside down. After clearing the second scenario, he did not turn off the Walkman immediately. He soon discovered the pattern of the frequency. Every 1 minute, FM 27, 3 would repeat the 4-digit password, and the other frequencies would be filled with noise. After his body temperature returned to normal, Fong Bujua continued to move forward. He believed that the scenario did not plan or calculate how long it would take for Arthur Siegel to reach the hospital after he escaped. The initial recording said that he had 40 minutes to find the exit, or he would die from the poison in his body. However, Fong Bujua's menu did not show the status poisoned, and at that moment, he could not tell whether the decrease in his life points was due to the cold or the slow effect of the poison. In any case, this was not an obvious poison effect, but some kind of plot event. To put it simply, he had to clear the scenario within 40 minutes, or it would be game over. Fong Bujua had already spent more than 20 minutes. His speed of clearing the second stage was already quite fast. Combined with the 5 minutes he had spent in the first room and the time he had spent running, when he arrived at the third game, he should have around 15 minutes left. The system had to consider the possibility that the player would choose to dig through the snow in the second scenario, and that would take even longer. Therefore, in terms of time, the game that Fong Bujua was going to face next should be the last one. After he completed it, he would end the scenario. Chapter 21. On the way to the next room, Fong Bujua discovered something worth celebrating. His workmanship had been unlocked, and it was now level F. It was unclear whether it was because of the Walkman or folding newspaper, but in any case, it was good that it was unlocked. If the reward for clearing the game was workmanship or general ability, he should be able to learn it directly. Several minutes later, he finally reached another door that was marked red. This time, he pushed the door open and entered. The room was not big, and there were 2 televisions placed against the wall. There was a table in the middle of the room, and there was a key placed on the table. On the right side of the wall, there was a pipe that extended about 1 meter out from the ground. Fong Bujua walked over to take a look, and the diameter was just large enough to fit a tennis ball inside. This time, he did not touch anything, and the door behind him closed on its own. At the same time, one of the 2 televisions lit up, and the white doll appeared on the screen. Hello, Arthur. Perhaps you think the game is coming to an end, or perhaps you think you will be able to leave this place alive soon. But ask yourself, do you really have the qualifications to do so? Can a moment of kindness and a moment of pain change your hypocritical nature? You and I both know that you have not received real salvation. Fong Bujua did not say anything. He felt that something was off. The so-called moment of kindness and moment of pain should refer to the choice he made when he cleared the first 2 rooms. This meant that the video had only been recorded for a few minutes, or perhaps it was a live broadcast. The screen of the second television suddenly lit up, and Fong Bujua saw something unbelievable. Wang Tanji appeared on the screen. On the screen, Wang Tanji was walking down a corridor. He looked injured. There was blood on his body, and the way he walked was weird. Rolling the Vanity Fair has allowed you to meet many people who call you brother. I believe that even if they know you are missing or dead, they will not care. But, Arthur, you still have a friend, a real friend, the doll said. The doll said, John is also playing a game now, but his end is a dead end. The only thing that can help him escape, and at the same time, the thing that can help you leave this place, is the key on the table. You can use it to open the last door, or you can throw it down the pipe in the corner and send it to John. There was only one key, and if the despicable and hypocritical Arthur Siegel chose to die, the good and honest John would live. Life or death, make your choice. Fong Bujua stared at the TV screen for a full 2 minutes. He was trying to figure out what was going on with Wang Tanji in the second television. Was this an illusion created by his own scenario, or was he really seeing Wang Tanji in another solo survival mode scenario? If it was the latter, then the system was a bit too powerful. It could overlap the scenarios of 2 different players at one moment. He thought to himself, looks like I'll have to ask Xiao Tan after the scenario ends. Now, I can only speculate, but there's no way to verify it. At that moment, Fong Bujua could not help but praise the brilliance of this scenario. Arthur was indeed not a good person, and the previous 2 scenarios were not enough to change anything. However, the previous scenarios were just the foundation. Based on this scenario, the last choice was the key. If Arthur sacrificed John and chose to escape, then he would be condemned by his conscience for the rest of his life. His selfishness and hypocrisy would be magnified to torment his mind. Arthur would eventually walk to the other extreme, becoming a crazy altruist, a real philanthropist, and only then would his conscience feel better. This was the so-called redemption. After the trial, the player would learn to respect and cherish life and be grateful for the rest of their life. On the other hand, Arthur would choose to die so that his good friend John could live on. That would be a form of sacrifice. Fong Bujua shrugged. He walked to the table and picked up the key. Looking at the last closed door, he mumbled to himself. In other words, this scenario of mine has ended in failure. He walked to the pipe, and without giving it much thought, he tossed the key into it. Then, the screen of the second television was turned off, and the doll on the first television spoke again. An admirable choice, Arthur. Don't worry. Death is the ascension of the soul. Looks like this was not a recording. That door. Fong Bujua turned around and pointed to the door. It leads to a dead end. The doll's neck turned slightly, but there was no reply. Your choice of words is very interesting and very careful. I was almost tricked. Fong Bujua said. The thing that can help him escape is also the thing that can help me leave this place. He smiled. Haha, if I use the key to open the door, I'll die, right? The doll still did not answer, remaining silent. You said that I can use it to open the last door, but you did not say that I'll live after I open it. I'll only leave, Fong Bujua said. And the most important hint is, if the hypocritical Arthur chooses to die, the kind and righteous John will survive. He opened his hands. I thought about it for a few seconds before I understood. There is no conflict. At this moment, John has the key, so he can survive, but the hypocritical Arthur is already dead. Standing here is the Arthur Sig who is willing to sacrifice himself for his friend. He is an admirable person, and his soul has been ascended. Am I right? The doll finally spoke. Very good. You have seen through the rules of the game, but that makes me question the result of the trial. Are you really just a set of scenario data generated by the system? Fong Bujua narrowed his eyes and walked to the television. Is it possible that for you, my choice is not a logical conclusion? Is it that important whether the basis of my conscience or cunning that I used to clear the trial? He squatted before the television and used the same tone as in the recording. He lowered his voice and said, the final choice in this scenario is not actually a choice between life and death. It is a game about the ID, ego, and superego. If I put myself in Arthur Sig's shoes, I will be making the choice based on my own consciousness. The despicable reporter will undoubtedly abandon others to survive. He will use the key to open the door, and that will lead to his death. If I look at the problem from the perspective of a player, I will be making the choice based on my own consciousness. For the players of Thriller Paradise, this is nothing more than a scenario. The choice is simple: clear the scenario or game over. Therefore, I will still use the key to open the door, and I will still die. Only a person who is brought into the subjective role with an objective mind, a player who is focused on playing the role of Arthur Sig, could make the decision with the consciousness of the superego. That way, even if I couldn't solve your trick, I would still choose to throw the key into the pipe, because that would be the perfect interpretation of the script. And then, you will give me a surprise ending, isn't that right? The TV screen suddenly went black, as if the doll had forcefully stopped the communication. The familiar and emotionless system voice rang in Fong Bujua's ears. You have completed the scenario. Automatic teleportation in 60 seconds. Chapter 22. Completed special and hidden quests. 0. Unlocked worldview. None. Time of terror points increase. 0. Highest terror points, 0%. Average terror points, 0%. Your terror rating is Embodiment of Valor. Extra reward obtained. Please choose later. Obtain skill points. 100-inch additional bonus from skill points. EXP, 100. Game coins. 1,000-inch scenario clear reward. Skill card X1. Calculation complete. Please continue. Fong Bujua looked at the checklist in the login lobby, and then he heard the announcement. You have reached level 5. The upper limit of your stamina points has increased to 500,500. His current EXP was 150,500. In terms of EXP, the difference between solo survival mode and training mode was not that big. Feng Bujue and Wang Tanji were level 1 and 2 respectively when they queued up for the team training mode. If they did not consider the fact that they had killed the boss, the EXP gained from completing the scenario would have been around 300, not 500. This solo survival mode scenario was generated by Feng Bujue when he was level 4. Based on the EXP ratio, he could have gained almost 400 EXP from completing the solo survival mode. Compared to the training mode, which only gave him EXP, Feng Bujue gained skill points, additional EXP, and game coins. Other than that, there was also the reward for clearing the scenario and the additional reward for his terror rating. However, there was one thing in the calculation list that confused Feng Bujue. He had brought out the one-time use syringe from the training mode, but in the calculation list, the item obtained items showed none. However, this time, the monkey had been calculated. He was very confident. The game information that he had read before did not mention something like this. Of course, that was to be expected. The game description on the official website was meant for advertising and science. They would not have written down every single detail. Unsolved mysteries were like a fishbone stuck in Feng Bujue's throat, especially when it came to these seemingly innocuous questions. He felt uncomfortable because he could not figure them out. He was too lazy to look at the forum. Because of this kind of system-related situation, what the forum said might not be correct. Thus, he directly contacted the online customer service through the screen in the login space. The other party was stumped by this question. He checked for a long time before giving an answer. Items that are categorized as consumables like medicine, bandages, synthetic materials, machine parts, and so on, as long as their quality is below normal, when they are obtained from the scenario and brought out, they will not be shown in the inventory. Equipment with trash quality was the same as the previous item. At this point, Feng Bujue understood. There were many things that fit the previous two criteria in a team scenario. If, in the future, there was a person who had nothing better to do. During the last 60 seconds of the countdown, he would pick up a bunch of random items like rocks, twigs, grass, bricks, and wooden sticks and carry them all out of the scenario. The system would have to use a large section to record these useless items. That was how the system came to be. After understanding that, Feng Bujue wanted to take out the monkey that he had obtained from his inventory to take a look. However, when he tried to do so, the monkey disappeared, and in its place was a card that was about the size of a tarot card. At the same time, Feng Bujue saw the system announcement. After completing the scenario, the player has a chance of obtaining a plot item that can be brought out of the scenario. This type of item is normally related to the scenario's secondary quest or an item that is not used during the main plot due to various reasons, like the player using their own power to overcome the plot requirement. When this type of plot item is successfully brought into the login space, it will be transformed into a puzzle card and added to the card set system, temporarily unavailable. After reading the system announcement, Feng Bujue turned his attention to the puzzle card that he was holding. Even though the card was made of paper, it felt like it could not be bent. The edges of the card glowed with a white light, and the picture on both sides was the same. The picture on the card that he was holding was of a monkey, and the style was ink painting. Puzzle card, monkey. That was the only description on the item. It was just a name and nothing else. Feng Bujue glanced at Wang Tanji's status in the friend menu. The kid was still in the game. He was not in a hurry to get the reward, but contacted customer service again. Then, let me explain this card set system. Before that, there was a concept that needed to be explained, which was the classification of equipment. The information provided to the players on the official website was as follows. Trash. It is not easy to make this worthless piece of trash work normally. Broken. It is old and flawed, but it is better than nothing. Normal. This equipment is normal. It will be of great help to you if you use it wisely. Excellent. A piece of good and reliable equipment, like a trustworthy partner. Excellent quality equipment will have at least one attribute or special effect. Perfect, a flawless piece of equipment, rare and powerful. Perfect quality equipment will have a special effect, but it might not have an attribute. Legendary, a divine item that is coveted by many. It can increase the user's power level. From this classification, one could see that excellent quality equipment would be the mainstream in the later stages of the game, and it was the level that most players would be able to obtain. As mentioned earlier, the main way to obtain equipment in Thriller Paradise was through searching. But what if a player could not find excellent quality equipment and fell into a vicious cycle where the lack of equipment led to the lack of equipment, and the lack of equipment led to the lack of equipment, and the lack of equipment led to the lack of equipment? This card set system was the solution that the gaming company came up with. It was a way for the players to obtain equipment at the later stages of the game. As long as the player collected a set of cards, they could exchange it for a piece of equipment. The quality was guaranteed to be excellent, and there was even a chance for it to be perfect. But what was the concept of a set? The answer was random and unlimited. Using this puzzle card, Monkey as an example, if one had the puzzle cards, Monk, White Horse, Pig, and Cannibal, these 5 cards could be considered set. Similarly, if one had the puzzle cards, Rat, Cow, Tiger, Rabbit, Dragon, Snake, Horse, Goat, Chicken, Dog, and Pig, plus this Monkey, the 12 card could be considered a set. As long as the system determined the set of cards could be considered a set, it meant that the concept of the set was valid, and they could be used to exchange for equipment. From this point of view, any puzzle card could theoretically be added to many different sets. For example, the monkey that Phone Bujua brought out might not turn a puzzle card. Monkey. It might turn in a puzzle card. Gorilla, King Kong, Furball, Peach, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and so on. Or for example, if a player brought out a pair of straw sandals from the scenario, it might turn in a puzzle card. Foot, Straw, Uncle Wong, and so on. This kind of diversity allowed every plot item to turn into a useful puzzle card. At the later stage of the game, if the player was strong enough to overcome most of the difficulties with brute force, then the can be taken out of the scenario attribute on the plot item might change their strategy of clearing the scenario. Therefore, for players who did not have any equipment, they could enter solo survival mode and only complete the main storyline. They would ignore all the triggered side quests and leave all the plot items behind. When they left the scenario, they would be puzzle cards. Of course, it was impossible for the player to kill themselves after taking all the things they wanted. To obtain the set of puzzle cards, clearing the scenario was the minimum requirement. No matter which mode, if the player died in the middle of the scenario, the equipment could be taken away. Only the plot items obtained in the scenario would remain in the scenario. This was to prevent the death of one player in team mode from causing the others to be unable to continue the mission. That was about it. Phone Bujua had finished his inquiry. He ended the call with customer service and then operated the menu to convert the puzzle cards into data and store them in the login lobby. Then, he prepared to claim the reward for clearing the scenario. From the beginning, he did not have much hope for the terror points, because the scenario was not that scary to begin with. However, he was more interested in the chance to draw the lottery. The random skill from clearing the scenario had to be something that he could use, so it would either be a general mastery or a workmanship mastery. With regards to the terror rating reward, he had to choose his equipment again, because after clearing the scenario, he was still defenseless. Phone Bujua walked out from the elevator and entered the large metallic room. Similar to last time, there were 2 hollow glass pillars. First, he went to the reward for clearing the scenario. Through the virtual menu, he picked up a random skill. A skill card slowly formed in white light inside the glass tube. When Phone Bujua took out the card, he was quite calm, but when he saw the description of the skill, his shrill scream echoed through the room again. What the F***CK is this? Chapter 23. Consumption, 100 stamina points learning requirement. Workmanship F remark. As everyone knows, the founder of the great Rotten Apple Company, the goblin inventor and entrepreneur, Mr. Chewy Steve, was once a repairman when he was young. His epitaph read, "Only a newbie would try to fix something completely." To make it more understandable, he even printed the company logo, a chipped apple, on his tombstone. Feng Bujue had always been unlucky when it came to gaming, and getting this skill was a good reflection of that. At low levels, skills like Exploding God Fist that had low learning requirements, low consumption, and a limited number of uses could be of great help to players. This hasty repair was one of those skills. After level 20, even if the skill bar was not full, it was not a good skill to use. The effect was weak, the consumption was high, and the worst part was that it was limited to mechanical objects. If this skill could be used on all equipment, then it would be of some value. For example, if a player picked up a rusted iron pipe and had enough stamina points, they could use this skill to turn it into a normal iron pipe. That way, they would be able to slightly increase the power of the pipe. But reality was cruel. This skill could only be used on machinery. At that moment, Feng Bujue was already imagining how many situations he could use this skill. If he picked up a broken chainsaw, then spending 100 stamina points to make it run for 3 minutes was worth it. Theoretically speaking, this skill should be able to restore the function of a broken vehicle. For example, if he got into a broken car at full stamina points and used it several seconds before the skill expired, the car would be able to run normally for about 15 minutes. But these were just hypotheses. It was hard to say whether a vehicle would be affected by this skill. After all, large objects like cars were not considered items, and players could not check their attributes. After all, he would not be able to sell this skill for much money during the open beta. So Feng Bujue learned the skill, and this skill was added to his skill tab. Then, he came to the second glass column, and the system notification appeared. Please select your additional reward. 1. Randomly draw a piece of equipment corresponding to your level. 2. 5,000 game coins. 3. 200 EXP. Feng Bujue resolutely chose the equipment option. First of all, the last two options were completely unnecessary at this stage. Secondly, he didn't believe that he would be able to get a second stone, even though he was already level 5 and only had a skill with no combat power and a plastic syringe. The white light converged and materialized. The white shadow of a piece of equipment gradually appeared in the glass pillar. Before it was fully formed, Feng Bujue knew that there was a chance this time. Looking at the outline, it was definitely a weapon. Name: Mario's wrench type. Weapon quality: excellent. Attack: medium. Attribute: fire. Special effect: when attacking the head of a humanoid or humanoid creature, there's a high chance of inflicting heavy damage. Remark: the owner of this wrench is very famous. He called himself a plumber, but he never fixed pipes. He only crawled in and out of pipes, jumping here and there. He was always busy fighting against evil forces, saving the kingdom, searching for the princess, and so on. Sometimes he would disguise himself as a frog, a raccoon, or even Xidagarba. Sometimes he would even release fireballs or throw hammers, but he never. Note that this is never a plumber's must-have tool. Therefore, the wrench was enraged. It wanted to prove that the wrench could be used in battle. This world is quite strange. After Feng Bujue looked at the attributes, even though he complained, he was still quite happy. No matter how strange the remark was, at least the other attributes of the equipment were not bad. After returning to the elevator, Wang Tanji's communication request appeared on the screen. When Feng Bujue accepted, he sent a party invitation. "How is it? Have you reached level 5? Wang Tanji replied, "Ah, the EXP is just right. Brother Ju, what about you?" In the friend list, he could only see the other person's IGN and current status, but his level was not shown. However, when Wang Tanji asked that question, since he accepted the party invitation, the party status tab appeared on screen. Then, he saw Feng Bujue's level information. "So it's here. Brother Ju, did you get any equipment?" Wang Tanji asked. "I used the remaining ultimate punch earlier. Before leaving the scenario, other than the fruit knife that I already had, I also found a piece of armor. Let's not talk about that for now. In the scenario that you were in, did you need the key at the end?" Feng Bujue asked. "Ah, yes, how did you know?" Wang Tanji replied. How did you get the key? Feng Buju asked. Wang Tanji was startled when he heard that question, but he quickly replied, "At the end of the scenario, I found a key lying on the ground before the exit door. Even now, I still have no idea what happened. I was already in my limit. My life points and stamina points were almost depleted, and there was something chasing after me. Who would have thought that I would be able to complete the scenario by picking up a key to open the door at a place like that?" He paused. Brother Ju, do you know why? Is this what happened at the end of your scenario as well? How is that possible? Feng Bujua said, "My scenario was very difficult, and your situation, the system probably thought that with your intelligence, picking up the key to open the door was already a kind of puzzle solving, so it came up with this setting. This kind of puzzle solving is for chimpanzees." Wang Tanji grumbled. Feng Bujua smiled. He had purposely changed the topic, and that was why he joked. "Are you ready? Is there anything else that you need to do before the team survival mode?" "I'm fine. Let's do it," Wang Tanji replied. Feng Bujue operated the touchscreen and soon pulled out the queue menu. After the two reached level 5, the modes that they could enter had changed. Now the menu showed solo survival mode, normal, and team survival mode, normal. Training mode had been turned off. It was an invisible option. Solo survival mode was grayed out, and it was not available. Feng Bujue, level 5, Wang Tanji, level 5, please select the game mode that your team wishes to join. You have selected Team Survival Mode, Normal. Please confirm. Confirmed. The number of team members has been randomized, 5. Your team has joined the queue. Currently searching for other players or teams that are ready. Matching complete. Coordinating neural connections. Generating scenario, downloading. Please wait a moment. Chapter 24. His vision was plunged into darkness, and the game menu temporarily could not be opened. After a brief daze, Feng Bujue realized that in this endless darkness, he had moved from standing to sitting. He appeared to be sitting on some kind of hard chair with a back. Welcome to Thriller Paradise. This time, the voice that appeared was normal, like a normal young man, but the way it said that still sounded weird. Download complete. You're currently in Team Survival Mode, Normal. A scenario introduction is provided in this mode, and there's a chance of triggering hidden side missions and special world building. Reward for clearing the scenario. Gain 80% extra EXP from clearing the scenario. Playing the scenario introduction soon. The game will start immediately after that. The cutscene appeared before Feng Bujue's eyes. It felt like he was wearing a pair of sunglasses that allowed him to watch a movie. At the same time, the corresponding narration appeared in his ears. This is a modern, bustling city, just like all the major cities in the world today. It is filled with skyscrapers, endless traffic, an overloaded population, and polluted air. As the narration continued, the image before his eyes played in fast forward, but it was just a normal street scene. Until one night, the sun set and never rose again. Behind the drifting dark clouds, the dim moonlight shines on this dead and lonely city. The image before Feng Bujue's eyes darkened until it was completely dark. Several seconds later, some light returned. It was the brightness that a dark moon should have. There was still some light in the city, but it was not the brightness that a bustling city should have in the night. Looking down from afar, many stationary vehicles could be seen on the streets of the city, but not a single pedestrian could be seen. There are also no moving objects. You open your eyes and realize that you are sitting on the last train that you often take. You will soon realize that the strangers around you and yourself are the only survivors in this city. When that sentence entered his ears, Feng Bujue felt his eyes brighten, and his senses returned to normal. The game menu could be opened. It looked like the scenario had started. He was indeed sitting on a moving train. The scenery outside the window flew by, morphing into horizontal lines. He lifted his head and saw Xiao Tin sitting not far away from him. Unsurprisingly, there were 3 other passengers in the carriage. On the left side of Feng Bujue and Wang Tanji, a man and a woman sat in another row. They were both under the age of 20 and looked like they were still students. The boy's face was very pale, and his hair was quite long. To be honest, this style made him look similar to the girl beside him. The two of them were of average height, and their figures were on the thin side. They could be described as handsome men and beautiful women. Judging from their nicknames, there was no doubt that they were a couple. The boy was called Loneliest When I Miss You, and the girl was called Loneliest When I Miss You. In team survival mode, this was the final adjustment time before the game started. It was also the system that provided the conditions for the players to interact. In this environment, the players' IDs were displayed above their heads, and they could see each other. When they left this place, the IDs above their heads would disappear. If they wanted to find out their teammates' names, they would need to open the menu and go to the Team tab. The information that could be seen in the Team tab was limited. First, the appearance of the teammates could not be seen in the menu, only their name and level. Second, the status next to it only showed alive or dead. As for the life points of this person and whether there were any abnormal statuses, it was unclear. There were 5 people in this carriage, and there was one more that had not been introduced. He sat in a row opposite Feng Bujue and Wang Tanji. Even when he was sitting, the man should be at least 9 meters tall, and his weight should be around 100 kilograms. Based on his appearance, this big brother was definitely under 30. His face was cold, and the line of his jaw was firm. His shoulders were wide, and his body was V-shaped. Through the long-sleeved t-shirt, one could see the outline of the muscles on his arms. With this kind of appearance, it was not an exaggeration to call him Mr. Sai. Even though the nerve-connected game allowed the players to modify their appearance in the virtual world, there was a limit to this function. The face could be photoshopped, but the size could not be changed more than 8%. Any more than that, and there would be problems. For example, if you had a person who was 2 meters tall use a body that was 5 meters tall, he would not be able to adapt. Therefore, assuming the player was 180 centimeters tall, the upper limit would be 194 for centimeters, and the lower limit would be 165 6 centimeters. For a person who weighed 60 kilograms, the upper limit could be increased or decreased by 8 kilograms. The adjustment of body proportions was a very vague concept. For example, a beer belly could be adjusted to a flatter stomach, but it would not become abs. Therefore, other than the appearance, the man before them was most likely still a muscular man in real life. There was a possibility that he had not adjusted his appearance. After meeting their eyes, the man spoke first. "Let me introduce myself." He patted his chest. "Long Almin just reached level 10. "I can see that. Nice to meet you," Feng Bujue replied. Wang Tanji asked curiously, "Big brother, is the first part of your nickname part of your name? Is it possible to have such a long name?" "Oh, that. It's a title. It's given by the system when one reaches level 10, Long Almin replied. The name above his head was Long Almin, the Valiant Vanguard. Feng Bujue obviously knew about this setting, and that was why he said, "I can see that. You seem to be very powerful," Wang Tanji said with glowing eyes. Feng Bujue interrupted. "What do you mean by seem to be very powerful? How can you say that?" He said with a straight face. "That is very powerful." "Haha, you're flattering me. I'll just play it a little longer." Long Almin laughed. He enjoyed Feng Bujue's compliment. "Brother Long, you're too humble. I can tell with one glance that you're not someone to be trifled with." Feng Bujue called him Brother Long directly. He was sincerely impressed by someone who dared to use a name like Long Almin. When he looked at the name, it felt like there was a domineering aura plastered on his face. Feng Bujue then turned around to address the two students. "Nice to meet you." "Ah, nice to meet you," the two replied casually. They did not seem to want to talk to the three of them. In the next few minutes, Feng Bujue chatted with Long Almin about their gaming experience, and Wang Tanji joined in. This was the first day of the closed beta. Actually, they were all new players, and there was much to share. Long Almin should not be called Long Almin. He should be called Guidalu. He was a very generous person. He treated people with sincerity and generosity. His sincerity could be heard, seen, and felt. His advice was very pertinent, and he did not show any condescending attitude, just because Feng Bujue and Wang Tanji were of lower levels. On the other side, The two lovers were cuddling and whispering to each other in an intimately intimate manner. Some might ask, isn't intimacy prohibited in this game? However, it was stated earlier that sexual harassment was prohibited, but the two of them were in a consensual situation. Of course, they could not do anything too out of line. At most, they could kiss and hug, but that was not enough to get to second base. In a harmonious society, the game had absolute restrictions on further actions. It did not take long for the train to slow down until it completely stopped. The lights in the train station were still on, but there was no sound. Other than the sound of the train moving on its own, there was no announcement. The door opened, and almost at the same time, all the lights in the train went off. Miss Saddest was given a fright and yelped softly. Mr. Loneliest, who was next to her, was startled as well, but he did not make a sound. He merely shivered. This scream came from Xiao Tan. After he finished, Feng Bujue sighed. If not for the system, I really would have stuck the wrench down your throat. He shook his head and walked out of the train. Even though the lights in the train were off, it was not completely dark because the lights at the platform were still normal. Wang Tanji's scream was truly embarrassing. Mr. Loneliest and Ms. Saddest shot him condescending looks from the bottom of their hearts. Long Aomin resisted the urge to laugh and followed Feng Bujue out of the train with a fake smile. About 10 seconds later, the five arrived at the platform. Feng Bujue looked around and said, I'll go take a look at the front of the train. Perhaps there's a driver there. I don't think we should go alone. How about we all go together? Long Aomin suggested. Sigh, why would he need a driver? That's so troublesome and a waste of everyone's time. Isn't there a level 10 big brother here? We'll follow him all the way to the surface. No matter what we see, we'll just kill them all. After all, we'll clear the level, Mr. Loneliest said. Feng Bujue could see from the team status that Mr. Loneliest and Ms. Saddest were level 7 and 6 respectively. In any case, they were higher than him and Xiao Tan, so they had more authority. Okay then, Feng Bujue agreed just like that. He turned to Long Aomin and asked, Brother Long, what do you think? No problem. You just follow behind me. If we run into a battle, just lend me a hand. Long Aomin answered easily as he walked up the escalator. Come with me. When he stood on the steps of the escalator, he took out a shield from his backpack and equipped it on his right wrist. Brother Ju, what's going on? Wang Tanji lowered his voice to ask Feng Bujue. He knew Feng Bujue very well. His brother Ju was not someone who would change his mind because of someone else's words. Furthermore, Mr. Loneliest's suggestion was not brilliant. In fact, it was questionable whether it was correct or not. It's nothing. I didn't think the chance of this train having a driver was high, so I just wanted to give it a try. Feng Bujue replied softly. Since someone is against it, there's no harm in taking a step back on this kind of insignificant disagreement. As they spoke, they followed Long Aomin to the floor above the escalator. However, the five of them were still inside the train station, and they still needed to go up one floor to return to the surface. After they came up the escalator, there was a sign that pointed to the various exits and the landmarks that led to the surface. However, that was not important to them. They just needed to find the nearest exit and see what the city was like. Right then, the system announcement appeared in their ears. Main quest triggered. Chapter 25. After the announcement, Feng Bujue checked the game menu again and realized that the quest tab had been unlocked. This was the first time he had officially received a main quest. The previous training mode and solo survival mode were completed inside an enclosed building, and the scenario was very small. There was not much room for choice in the plot, so the system did not bother to create a mission. However, the current team survival mode had a large map with a high degree of freedom, so the system had to come up with a main quest to guide the final direction of the game, or else the players might not know what to do. After opening the quest tab, Feng Bujue saw a new window cover the front of the menu, and the box showed the quest content. The description of this main quest was simple. Search the city and find the demonic door. This feels like a fantasy setting. Feng Bujue glanced at the quest and closed the game menu. This city is so big. Isn't looking for a door like looking for a needle in a haystack? Wang Tanji said. The keyword that the quest gave us is not door, but demon. Fong Bujue said as he walked to an automatic ticket machine. He looked at the subway map printed on the machine. There are 12 subway lines in this city, even though they are represented by different colors, but his finger moved along the lines on the map and stopped at one spot. Among these 10 intersecting lines, there is this area. He opened his arms and pressed them on the map. He blocked out the lines around that area, leaving only the middle area exposed. 5 intersecting lines form a very standard geometric shape, a pentagram. "Brother, this is too far-fetched," Mr. Lonely said. Mr. Lonely said, "Look carefully again. You might be able to find a lot of other geometric shapes in that mess of lines." The second my finger stopped, it meant that I had finished my search. Fong Bujue answered. He turned around to explain. "Before we reached this floor, be it inside the subway or on the platform, we could only see the name of the station and the map of the line. A complete map of the subway lines like this could not be found on the lower floor. Before the system notification rang out, we didn't encounter any monsters, and we didn't waste much time either. We didn't do anything substantial. However, there must be a reason for the quest to be triggered. If this quest didn't have any trigger conditions, we would have received it while we were sitting in the subway. There was no need for the system to wait for us to come up to the next floor. So, the possibility I can think of is that there is something on this floor that doesn't exist on the floor below. The information it provides can lead us to the demon gate mentioned in the mission." At this point, he turned around and used his left palm to pat the subway route map printed on the ticket machine. There are only 12 subway routes, but there are thousands of roads on the surface. If this subway route map is meaningless, then the city map is even more meaningless, unless we can find a tourist map marked with a landmark like the Devil's Gate. He took a deep breath. In conclusion, if no one comes up with a constructive opinion that contradicts this deduction, or if the opinion itself is not supported by any valid evidence, then please follow me to this area on the map. If I'm wrong, we can reorganize our thoughts and discuss it again. If I'm right, I'll take the skill points and we'll clear the quest. Everyone will be happy." Fong Bujue finished in one breath, and everyone was stunned. Wang Tanji, on the other hand, appeared rather calm. This was because he had seen this many times since he was young. Fong Bujue's reasoning ability was a derivative of his reading addiction. He was a very clever person. When he was 16, he scored 138 on the Binet test at school. The left and right hemispheres of his brain each accounted for 69 points of balanced thinking. Compared to those super geniuses who scored 140 points and above, he was still classified as a normal person. However, his observation, memory, understanding, and reasoning skills were well-trained and incomparable to those of normal people. As Mr. Conan Doyle said in the words of Sherlock Holmes, a good detective, in addition to profound knowledge and experience, was more important than correct reasoning skills. In the novel, Sherlock Holmes always spared no effort to promote his own set of deduction method, and Fong Bujue was obviously a loyal fan. His reading addiction came from another set of Sherlock's theory. Treat knowledge as a reserve and manage the brain as a library. Sweep away the unimportant things and forget them. Put the less important things in the attic and leave the needed things at hand. This seemed to be an idealized memory habit and thinking pattern, but in fact, it could be achieved with a certain amount of training. Fong Bujue was a classic example of a self-taught genius. There were many things in the world that were easier said than done. For example, doing dozens of push-ups at home every day would make one a muscle man. Memorizing a few words a day would make one a CET for a CET6 expert, and writing a few thousand words a day would make one a guru. If there was a ranking of self-deceiving thoughts, these would be at the top. When faced with this kind of self-discipline training, the chance of a normal person giving up halfway was very high. But Fong Bujue was one of the few who persisted and eventually turned reading and reasoning into a habit and hobby. Brother Fong is right. Following this train of thought is better than wandering around the city. The latter part of Long Ao-Meen's sentence was directed at Mr. Loneliest. Oh, okay. Mr. Loneliest had just recovered. Actually, he had not fully caught up to Feng Bujue's thought process and language, but he had a feeling that even though I don't quite get it, this guy seems to be very good at what he's saying. The five moved. Long Aomin walked at the front, and Feng Bujue followed closely behind. He told him which exit to take and was responsible for pointing out the general direction. When they passed through a wide safety corridor, Feng Bujue discovered something that looked like an Easter egg. Among the many billboards on the wall, there was an advertisement for the game Thriller Paradise. After taking a right turn, the group saw the exit that was diagonally above them. There was an escalator that went up the slope, but it had stopped moving. There were 2 rows of normal escalators on both sides. They walked up the stairs and reached the surface of the city. The moonlight was hazy, and the lights in the city were sparse. There were many cars parked on the street, but all of them were off. The billboards on the roadside buildings, the lights in business places, and the houses were all dark. Only the street lamps were still working. Even though there were no moving cars, the air that entered their nostrils still felt murky. There was a layer of fog before their eyes, making it hard to see things that were further away. When they were at the subway station, there was a ceiling above them, and there were walls around them. Since they were underground, they did not feel anything. However, once they reached the open ground, there was an indescribable atmosphere. The strange silence was suffocating. Of the 5, 4 of them had their terror points fluctuating. The stability was between 5 and 15%, and the various signs of fear were showing on their bodies. Follow this road, turn left after 4 blocks, and then keep moving forward. Feng Bujue's tone sounded normal, like he was not affected at all. He quickly identified the landmarks on the road and came up with a route. Long Aomin held his shield and nodded. He continued to lead the way, and the other 4 walked behind him. The group did not speak. They were alert, listening, and trying their best to walk as close to the streetlights as possible. Occasionally, there would be the sound of beasts breathing, rustling whispers, and barely discernible laughter coming from the darkness. In any case, no matter which it was, they could hear it, but they could not hear it clearly. Long Aomin would turn back to look every few meters. The more he looked, the more he felt that something was wrong. I say, Brother Feng, you have a high-risk occupation in real life, right? Long Aomin asked. He had trained all the way to level 10, and he had not met a player like Feng Bujue before. Fear was hard to hide, but Feng Bujue did not show any fear in his eyes. It was clear that he was not pretending to be brave. He really was not afraid. Combined with the sharp analysis earlier, Long Aomin even suspected that Feng Bujue was a professional SWAT officer in real life. I'm an artist, Feng Bujue replied calmly like he was telling the truth. Wang Tanji was too lazy to interrupt. Based on his knowledge, Feng Bujue usually claimed 2 professions, artist and literary tycoon. No matter how one looked at his behavior, these 2 answers were infuriating. Long Aomin did not expect to hear such an answer, and he did not know how to continue the conversation. Mr. Loneliest spoke up again. Who would call themselves an artist? Then, I can put it in another way. I am an artist who has a high aesthetic sense and skillful creative skills. I have been working in the field of art creation and have achieved a certain level of success. Isn't that just an explanation of those 3 words? Compared to saying those 3 words directly, that's more humble, isn't it? That's more arrogant, okay? Mr. Loneliest laughed. Mr. Loneliest pouted and told her if he didn't act dumb, would I be criticizing him? Right then, Feng Bujue suddenly stopped moving and quickly took out Mario's wrench from his inventory. I've just eased the tense atmosphere, and trouble is coming. Long Aomin and Feng Bujue saw 2 shadows flash through the darkness at the same time, but he could only make out a rough outline. He had no idea what they were, but they were probably some kind of monsters. They looked like deformed babies. The front of their arms are small size, and they move fast. In terms of numbers, there should be more than 1, Feng Bujue said calmly as he approached the darkness with the wrench. He had no idea that after saying those few words, his sleuthing mastery had been activated. Chapter 26. 1, 2, 3. There are 5 of them. Feng Bujue counted as he walked to the middle of the street, away from the brightest spot. He stepped on the hood of a car and stood on top of it. He gripped the wrench with one hand, and his eyes and ears were alert. He risked his life by standing at this vantage point, trying to lure the monster babies into the trap. Wang Tanji took out his fruit knife and put on the armor that he had obtained from the solo survival mode, a black helmet. It looked rather strange. He and Long Aomin stood back to back. They were not too far away from the streetlights, and they each took a different direction. Their way of dealing with loneliness was similar to the scene in horror movies. The woman hugged the man's arm, and the man stood in front of the woman. It was a suicidal stance. The monster babies weaved through the shadows on the street. They used the shadows of the buildings and cars to hide themselves. These monsters were indeed fast. They appeared in places where light could reach them for at most 1 second before disappearing in a flash. Feng Bujue stood further away from the streetlights, and there were more shadows around him. As expected, he was the first to be attacked. A monster baby leaped from the ground and leaped 2 meters into the air. It lunged at Feng Bujue from his side. He had expected this, so he turned to face it and saw the monster jump right before him. This monster's skin was a copper-green color, and its body was shaped like a baby's. Its face was extremely ugly, and it had a mouth full of jagged yellow teeth. Its forearms were replaced by 2 small sickles, and below its knees was a pair of animal legs that ended in hooves instead of feet. The reason Feng Bujue chose to stand on the roof was because the monsters were less than 1 meter tall. To attack a target that was high up, they would have to jump into the air. Now that the monster baby had jumped into the air, it would be suspended in the air, and it would be unable to evade for a period of time. In terms of strength, Feng Bujue obviously had the upper hand, and this was a bait. He was well prepared. He aimed at the monster baby's head, and from top to bottom, his hand came down with a clamp. The sound of the clamp being clamped could not have been more disgusting. You can imagine that a watermelon was flying toward your face, and you smashed it in midair with a stick. However, the watermelon was filled with rancid liquids, sticky pus, and semi-solidified slurry. It exploded and splashed towards you due to inertia. This was what happened to Feng Bujue. Even the smell of the liquid that splashed on him was very real. At that moment, Feng Bujue was radiating a dark and mysterious presence. To put it more simply, he was covered in the stench of decay. Even though the monster baby was killed by Feng Bujue in 1 hit, there were still 4 other monsters around him. Perhaps their number was based on the number of players, but they were not set to attack different players. Other than Feng Bujue, the others were standing under the light. Those who had watched horror movies knew that the monsters targeted those who were alone. Therefore, the other 4 monsters ignored the others and surrounded Feng Bujue, who was hiding in the dark. In this situation, Feng Bujue was indeed nervous, but unfortunately, he did not feel any fear. He was still able to think calmly, so he ruled out the idea of running back to the street lamp. At that moment, he had a rough idea of the speed of the monster babies. He knew very well that as soon as he got down from the roof of the car, if 2 monster babies would charge at him at the same time within 5 seconds, his legs would be chopped off by one of the sickles. Standing on the same level, these small and fast monsters were not easy to deal with. Feng Bujue believed that with his current ability, he could handle 1-on-1, but 1-on-2, he would definitely be injured. The second monster baby jumped at him 10 seconds later. Feng Bujue had no idea when the other 3 would jump, but he had to deal with the one before him first. He repeated the same trick and swung the wrench. This time, it was not as accurate as the first time, but the wrench still landed on the side of the monster baby's head. The fire element and heavy hit on the head provided a good effect, and the second monster baby was killed. The third wave of attacks came before Feng Bujue could pull his arm back. This time, 2 monsters jumped at him at the same time. They jumped at Feng Bujue from both sides. If he turned around to block, he would only be able to block one of them, and it was hard to say whether he would be able to kill them in 1 hit again. In the blink of an eye, a golden light flashed in the distance, and a burly figure entered the battle in the blink of an eye. Long Aomin moved like he was on a skateboard. His feet did not move at all. It was clear that he had activated some kind of skill. As expected of a level 10 character, he was powerful in battle. Long Almin raised the shield before him and used the skill to close in on one of the monsters, knocking it away. Then, he opened his arms and used the edge of the shield to brush against the waist of the other monster baby, causing it to lose its balance in the air and deviate from its trajectory. Fong Bujueth naturally would not miss this opportunity. With this 2-second pause, he had enough time to react. He used the wrench to take down the monster baby that was injured at the waist. Instantly, the smelly liquid splashed everywhere. Seeing that he had taken care of that monster, Long Almin rushed to the monster baby that he had knocked away earlier. When he was close enough, he bent his knees, raised the shield, and slammed it down. The monster baby had just landed after being knocked away by the skill. Before it could regain its footing, it saw a large man charging at it, so it raised the scythe in its hand to block. Even though it created some sparks on the surface of the shield, as a monster that was not that strong, it was impossible for it to cut through this piece of excellent equipment. Long Almin roared and slammed the shield into the monster several times. After a few screams, the monster baby turned into meat paste. It was dead. Where's the last one? Let's cut it down together. Wang Tanji had just run to the side. Actually, he had rushed over together with Long Almin, but Long Almin had used his skill to move, so he arrived in half a second. In those few seconds, Brother Long had completed 1 kill and 1 assist. Don't let your guard down. I don't think things will be that simple. Before Fong Bujue could finish, the surroundings suddenly turned dark. All the light in the city disappeared in that moment, including the moon and the sky. The whole world seemed to have been swallowed by something, and it was plunged into complete darkness. The sound of breathing, whispering, and laughter, everything became clear at that moment. It was as if they were right beside them, in the darkness that they could touch but could not see clearly. Several seconds later, similar to the cinematic at the start of the game, the blurry moonlight shone down again. The street lights came back on, and the surroundings returned to how it was before. As for the last monster baby hiding in the shadows, after the baptism of the strange darkness, it had undergone a drastic change. Chapter 27. When the darkness fell, Ms. Lonely screamed. Mr. Lonely was also scared, but his girlfriend was still holding onto his arm, so he couldn't scream too. He pretended to be calm and said to Mr. Lonely, "Don't be afraid. I'm here." But in fact, the level 7 lonely little brother did not even have a weapon that could be used to fight monsters. It could be said that he could not even protect himself. He and Mr. Loneliness had been in the team training mode since they were level 1. When they reached level 5, they entered a team survival mode, and they both died. However, his contribution was slightly bigger than Mr. Loneliness's, so when the other players cleared the scenario, Mr. Loneliness gained more EXP. Later on, they went to queue for another round of team survival, but they still died before they could clear the stage. Hence, one of them was now level 7, and the other was level 6. Neither of them had any equipment on them, nor did they have any skills. They were basically relying on their hands to fight monsters. Seeing this, I think many people understand. It was the system's arrangement that assigned Long Almin to this team. There might be hundreds of players queuing up at the same time, so why did it have to be a group of 5? It was because the system had judged Solitude and Solitude as weak players based on their previous performance. To give them a helping hand, the system added Long Almin, a level 10 player, into the team. At the same time, to maintain the overall difficulty level, the system found 2 low-level players who were good at clearing the dungeon to pull down the average level of the team. Therefore, there was this group of 5. Their total level was 33, and their average level was 6. This was just like a level 6 or 7 scenario. To put it in simpler terms, this was a chance created by the system for Mr. Loneliest and Mr. Loneliest. Hopefully, they would be able to clear the scenario once so that they would not die too many times and be traumatized. What was that? Long Almin said. Actually, this was just a slip of the tongue. He did not expect anyone to give him an answer, But because the situation was too scary, he was panicking and wanted to ask for someone else's opinion. Unexpectedly, Feng Bujue replied in a calm tone, "There are 3 possibilities. I'll explain it to you later." Wang Tanji did not shout this time, but his face was pale and his voice trembled as he said, Do you want to do this? Turning off the lights in the subway. Forget it. But in this dark night, they can actually turn off the lights. Are you trying to scare me to death? The scary thing is over there. Feng Bujue expressionlessly pointed behind Wang Tanji. Xiaodan turned around stiffly. Long Aomin and Mr. Sadist and Ms. Sadist also saw what Feng Bujue was pointing at. The last monster baby climbed onto the roof of a bus and screeched. Its appearance had changed. Its skin had turned black, its eyes emitted green light, and its teeth had become long and narrow fangs. Although its body size had not changed, the sickle in its hands and the pair of beast legs had nearly doubled in length. Now, when a monster stood completely upright, its height was close to 6 meters, and the attacking range of its size was obviously longer than the arm span of a human. Wang Tanji gulped. He lowered his head and looked at the fruit knife in his hand. Then, he looked at the monster's arm knife. A sense of inferiority rose in his heart. It feels like it's evolved after eating the strange sweet. Feng Bujue walked down from the bus with a wrench. I'll lure it down from the front, and you guys attack it from the side when the time is right. As Long Aomin spoke, he moved forward. Unlike Feng Bujue, he could not joke at a time like this. Unfortunately, Long Aomin's strategy did not work. Perhaps the monster baby was already able to understand the player's conversation, or perhaps its IQ was higher than they had imagined. The monster baby ignored Long Aomin. It kicked off the bus, leaving 2 dents in the roof. It leaped into the air, drawing a parabola in the air. It leaped over the trio's heads and flew about 10 meters away. Its target was Mr. Sadist and Ms. Sadist under the streetlight. At that moment, Long Aomin wanted to use the skill that he had used earlier to help, but there was nothing he could do. The skill that he had used to help Feng Bujue earlier, Lightning Bash, was a special skill given to him by his title, Brave Charger. It exhausted 30% of his maximum stamina points, and it had a cooldown of 1 hour. The status of the title system aside, in any case, the only person who had the power to save Mr. Sadist and Ms. Sadist was themselves. Seeing the monster fall from the sky, the sides in its hands slashed at the 2 of them. The 3 who stood in the middle of the street ran toward the monster, but the monster baby was like a falling rock that had been shot out from a catapult. With its enhanced jumping ability, its movement in the air was not something that the players could catch up to on foot. "Run toward us. Lower your heads," Feng Bujue roared. This was undoubtedly a command for Mr. Sadist and Ms. Sadist to react, and it was the correct response. No matter whether the 2 retreated or ran to the side, at least one of them would be killed once the monster landed. If they stood where they were or tried to block the attack, they would die even faster. The only way for the 2 to run forward was to get as close as they could to Feng Bujue's group in the few seconds that the monster missed and turned back. Only then would they have a chance of survival. In this kind of life and death situation, a command that sounded very confident was very effective. Those who felt helpless and fearful would often do as they were told without thinking too much. As expected, when Mr. Sadist heard the command, he dragged Ms. Sadist and charged forward. When a monster baby charged at them from the sky, the 2 slipped under its feet and jumped behind it. The sides missed, and the monster seemed to be flustered. Its hooves tapped the ground, and it turned to give chase. In just 2 seconds, it had reached the 2 who were running away. However, the monster was unlucky. A large man who was running in the opposite direction from the 2 had already reached it and blocked the monster's path. A gray metal shield blocked the monster baby's path like an iron wall. The strengthened scythe arm slashed down rapidly, but the attack only caused some sparks on the surface of the shield. It did not even leave a scratch on the shield. The monster even seemed to have slowed down its attack and pulled back its strength. Name: Ultron's fragment item type. Armor, quality, excellent defense point. Slightly strong element. Refraction special effect. None. Equip requirement. Fighting E, level 8. Remark. This is the remains of a certain Ultron that was destroyed. It was originally only the size of a thumb, but after adding secondary adamantium, it was made into this shield. It appears to be slightly stronger than other mass-produced shields, but many experiments have shown that there is no obvious difference in data to support this theory. The shield's attribute was very strong. Compared to Feng Bujue's wrench, it would be more useful in the early stages of the game. The monster's attack had slowed down because it knew that if it continued like this, its scythe arm would be flattened. The monster had given up on breaking through Long Almin's defense. It wanted to use its speed to go around this tough bone to deal with the others, but it had wasted too much time. A man in a black helmet and holding a fruit knife had sneaked up behind it. Since the weapon was not that powerful, and he was a coward, Wang Tanji did not dare act recklessly. He walked around a car and slithered behind the monster baby. Then he raised his weapon and plunged it into the monster baby's neck. It was unclear whether this kind of attack that could at least paralyze the monster, even if it did not kill it, was something that all medical students would do. With a strange scream, black pus spurted out and splattered Wang Tanji's face. However, the strange baby was still alive and was still struggling. At that moment, a wrench came from the side and stabbed into the monster's left eye socket. Chapter 28. This battle could not be called a tough one because none of the 5 players had lost any life points. However, after this battle, the strength of each member of the team could be seen. To put it simply, there were 3 players who had the ability to clear the scenario and 2 who were practically useless burdens. Wang Tanji's face and clothes were splattered with the monster baby's blood. Thankfully, the monster's body fluid did not come with any poison or other special effects. It only made the smell of his body worse. Long Almin had the shield, so his clothes were relatively clean. Feng Bujue, on the other hand, was seriously contaminated, but he quickly dealt with that problem. Feng Bujue seemed to have come up with a solution. After dealing with the last mutated monster baby, he turned and walked toward a car. He opened the door and pulled out a seat cover. Then, he walked to a fire hydrant by the roadside and used a wrench to loosen the valve. Water flowed out from it. Then, he used the seat cover as a rag and used the running water to wipe his face and clothes. He quickly cleaned up the mess on his body and washed away the smell. Wang Tanji followed suit and pulled out a rag from the car. Then he squatted down beside Feng Bujue and started to clean up the mess on his body. Long Almin inspected the bodies of the monster babies one by one. After confirming that they were all dead, he sighed in relief and sat down on the edge of the road to allow his stamina points to recover. Mr. Loneliest and Ms. Saddest walked over and returned to the range of the streetlight. "Thank you. If not for you, we would have been done for," Mr. Loneliest said. Mr. Lonesome said. His tone was much more humble. At first, he thought that his level was at least higher than the 2 level 5 guys, so he should have more right to speak. But now, he would no longer question the validity of Feng Bujue's suggestion. Before we reached the coordinates of the demonic gate, Feng Bujue had already washed his face clean. He wiped his shirt and pants as he said, "I have to help each of you find a piece of equipment. Even if it's a broken quality item, it's better than fighting barehanded. The city in this scenario is very big. I believe it won't be hard to find something that can be used as a weapon on the streets. If there's no other choice, I can pick up a steel rod or use Brother Feng's wrench to remove some of its parts," Long Almin said. "By the way, you mentioned earlier the 3 possibilities of the darkness. The first possibility is that the surrounding light didn't actually dim, but our vision and hearing were interfered with at the same time." Feng Bujue replied directly. "Our eyes were blinded by darkness, and strange sounds entered our ears, but everything around us was the same." He paused. If this hypothesis is valid, then there is a problem. Is the main entity that interfered with us hiding close to us, but we can't see it? Or is it somewhere far away? When they heard the terms nearby and can't see it, the other 4 felt goosebumps rise on their skin. Only Feng Bujue himself did not seem to care. Furthermore, Why did the monster change in the end? Is it because the thing that interfered with us used those few seconds to influence the monster as well? He wiped himself clean and tossed away the chair cover. These are temporarily and proven theories, and I do not wish to delve deeper into them. Let's talk about the second possibility. The darkness is real, and it has enveloped the entire city and even the entire world in this scenario. Wang Tanji chimed in. How can that be done? We can ignore the streetlights, but the moon is not a light bulb. How can it be turned off so easily? No matter how it was done, we can assume that some kind of power has done it. Then, what happened earlier was that this world was consumed by an unknown darkness, and it lasted for several seconds. In those few seconds, the monster, probably under the influence of this darkness, went through a biological change and strengthening. He put the wrench away and sat down on the edge of the road. Personally, I'm more inclined to believe the second possibility. This kind of darkness is more like a natural phenomenon. Its effect and effect have no specific target, and it's not just targeted at us. What about the third possibility? Long Almin asked. The system changed the scenario due to the efficiency we showed when we killed the first 4 monsters, Feng Bujue replied. That can't be right? Mr. Loneliest said. Mr. Loneliest and I have queued up for this scenario twice before, and we have never encountered something like this before. No matter how fast and easy the team was, there was no sudden increase in the difficulty of the scenario. Mr. Loneliest added, we've run into players around Brother Long's level before, and the monsters in the early stages of the scenario were all killed instantly. That's why I said earlier that with a level 10 player leading the way, we should be able to clear the scenario. He was telling the truth, but in the previous scenario, the level 10 player did not purposely come to protect them, so they had died in the end. I also think the third possibility is very small, Feng Bujue said with some thought. Actually, the reason he would come up with this hypothesis was because of the trap that the AI had set for him in the solo survival mode. At that moment, he quickly denied this possibility. This is the first time I've queued for a team survival mode, so I'm not sure about the actual situation. In that case, this possibility can be ruled out. By then, Wang Tanji had cleaned himself up. He stood up and said, the first 2 possibilities can be verified after some time, right? If what Brother Bujue said is true, then no matter which one it is, as long as the scenario continues, darkness will come again. You have a point. Long Almin stood up. His stamina points had recovered somewhat. Then we'd better deal with Mr. Loneliest and Mr. Loneliest equipment before we run into another monster or darkness. Feng Bujue also stood up and said, the route that I plan to take will pass by a police station. When we arrive there, we'll go into search. Perhaps there will be guns, batons. If we're lucky, we might find bulletproof vests, masks, and shields. He seemed to be running out of patience. I wanted to try shooting with a shotgun for a long time now. Long Almin's heart shivered when he heard that. Feng Bujue sounded like a crazed murderer who lacked the means to commit murder. The group discussed for a few minutes before moving again to head toward the police station that Feng Bujue had mentioned. Even though the oppressive atmosphere around them was still dark, and they had no idea how many monsters were hiding in the shadows, the 5 of them still had some anticipation toward the police station that Feng Bujue had described. After all, at the early stage of the game, shooting weapons were rare. If they could find a gun, and if it was a powerful shotgun or an assault rifle, even if they died halfway through the scenario, it would be worth it. Chapter 29. After walking down the street for about 15 minutes, the group of 5 arrived at the entrance of the police station. The building was about 500 square meters. The front door faced the street, and the side door led to the parking lot. Feng Bujue went to look at the side door first. It was a driveway, and at the end of it was a very tall wall. A movable iron fence blocked the entrance, and looking in, there was only darkness. It was probably a dead end. When he returned to the front door, Long Almin had already finished his inspection. The front door was made from wood and had a double door design. It was very sturdy, and it was tightly shut. There seemed to be something stuck in the door, and it would not budge even if they tried to push it open. Fong Bujue shook his head slightly, indicating that the side door was not working. Long Aomin shrugged and said, "It won't open here either." Wang Tanji took several steps to the side and looked at the outer wall of the building. There are iron frames on the windows. Looks like it will take some effort to get in. Before he finished, his expression changed. Air. Did you guys hear that? Of course, Fong Bujue heard it. He yelled, "Back off," as he rushed forward to grab Wang Tanji by his shoulders and pulled him back. Long Aomin, Mr. Sadist, and Mr. Sadist retreated when they heard that. Fong Bujue and Mr. Sadist had just taken several steps when they heard a dull thud behind them. They turned back to look, and the wall next to the police station's front door was knocked open from the inside, and a large monster poked out half of its body. If Wang Tanji had stood where he was for a few more seconds, he probably would have been crushed under the rubble already. Fine. I believe that was the sound of its footsteps rushing toward the wall. Wang Tanji's face was pale, but he did not speak loudly. By then, he had already gotten over the stage of shock, and he was getting used to situations that could raise his terror points to 50%, because his terror points had been stuck at 35% for a long time. Just like every mini-boss that broke through the wall, the monster roared when it appeared. Fong Bujue really did recognize this thing. Bloody corpse. This blood zombie was clearly stronger than the one Fong Bujue had encountered in the beginner's tutorial. Judging from its size, it was at least one size bigger. Moreover, the one he had encountered before had only punched a hole in the wall with its bare hands. Now, this one had directly punched a piece of the cement wall down. Very good. Not only did you open the entrance for us, but you also used a powerful monster to hint that there are good rewards inside. Huh. Fong Bujue curled the left side of his mouth as he glared at the tall and ferocious monster. His tone was as if he had encountered something good. Brother Fong, if you want to say good, then it's built on the foundation that we successfully kill this monster. Long Aomin was sweating profusely. He knew that this was not going to be an easy battle. Take it. Fong Bujue handed the wrench that he was holding to Long Aomin. There is no requirement to equip this. Brother Long, you can use it for now. Hitting the head will increase the damage. This. Long Aomin hesitated. Fong Bujue's action was the same as asking for a trade, and he was giving it away for free. In this world, the trust between people was incredibly low. Excellent equipment was undoubtedly good stuff during the closed beta, so one had to consider carefully before giving it away. What if the other party got their hands on it and decided to forcefully log off and give up on the scenario just to take the equipment for themselves? There was nothing Long Aomin could do about it. After all, Long Aomin was the one who initiated the trade, and the system could not help him. Quick, take it, Fong Bujue said. Long Aomin accepted Mario's wrench, and when he looked at its attributes, his expression shifted. So far, the impression that Fong Bujue gave people was that of a very careful and astute person. It was hard to imagine that he was the kind of person who would hand over such powerful equipment so easily. Brother Fong, aren't you afraid that I'll log off after taking your equipment? Long Aomin asked. Normally, those who would say something like that would not do something like that. The kind of people who would really go and steal equipment would usually just go offline. Afraid? Fong Bujue smiled bitterly and thought, if only I can be afraid. Perhaps worry is more appropriate. But honestly, I'm more worried that we'll be wiped out here. By then, the zombie had already pushed the lower half of the wall away and reached the street. After leaving the police station, the zombie looked even more ferocious. It was more than 2 meters tall, and its body was covered in a layer of half-coagulated blood. The skinless face was scarier than a normal skeleton. This monster was obviously a mini-boss, and the condition to trigger its appearance was for the players to stay at the police station for some time and try to find a way to enter. Brother Long, I'll need you to distract it and buy some time. I'll circle behind it and sneak in through the hole to see if there are any guns. If I find one, I'll come out to help, Fong Bujue said. Remember to conserve your life points. Don't fight it head-on. When he saw the zombie, he had already weighed the result of the battle. They did not have anything like blood corpses must die, so they only had the shield, wrench, and fruit knife to deal with this monster. These close-range weapons were fine against the smaller monster from earlier, but facing this zombie that was even larger than Long Almine, they did not have enough equipment. Therefore, the best solution was to increase Long Almine's power and have him deal with the zombie. Fong Bujued decided to take the risk and enter the police station to search for weapons. The appearance of this zombie confirmed Fong Bujued's suspicion that there was something valuable hidden inside the police station. It could be skills, equipment, or plot items. He planned to find one in the shortest amount of time and then return to deal with this monster. Don't worry. Even if I'm killed before you return, I'll find a way to return this equipment to you, Long Almine replied. Then, he charged forward to attract the zombie's attention, and they started to fight. There's no need to be so serious. It's just a piece of equipment. Fong Bujua looked like he did not care. He showed no fear facing the ghastly zombie. He leaned forward and moved at high speed. He circled around the zombie and jumped into the hole in the wall like he was jumping over a fence. He disappeared into the darkness of the police station. The two who were watching from afar did not know what to do. Mr. Loneliest and Ms. Saddest were still playing the role of the helpless. Helpless, they retreated further away so that they would not get in the way. Wang Tanji approached the zombie carefully. Currently, the monster's attention was mainly on Long Almine. When the time was right, he would cut the zombie and leave. He would only attack when he was sure that he would not be heavily injured by the boss. Different from Long Almine's fighting style, Wang Tanji's fighting style leaned toward agility. Dodging, attacking, and retreating, he focused on wearing down the enemy. This kind of fighting style was not suitable for equipment like blunt weapons or shields. A weapon with a blade was the best choice. He did not need to be strong. As long as he was fast enough, he could deal damage with the slightest brush of the blade. Later, both of them became players who focused on fighting, but with the same mastery, they gave birth to two characters with completely different fighting styles. Their fighting styles could be seen in this scenario. One specialized in strength, and the other specialized in speed. At the later stage of the game, the players would get stronger, and players with the same mastery would have an unimaginable difference in their fighting style due to the difference in their personal understanding of the fighting style. Furthermore, there were other masteries like fighting with marksmanship or fighting with healing. In other words, the characters in Thriller Paradise had endless possibilities. That was why the game did not have a definition of class. With the power of the system, class would become a limitation for the players. The later stage of an online game and the character's attributes were very important. If every character had the same attributes when they reached the highest level, and the skills that they could use were limited by their class, then the game would be very boring. Any normal player only needed to read the guides written by the top players, and they would know the basic attributes of their class, the combinations of skills, and the equipment that they should use to complement their skills. However, the current setting of the game gave the players a lot of freedom. First, other than stamina points, there was no such thing as character attributes. Life points and terror points were always displayed as percentages. There was no actual value. How much damage was dealt by an attack, or how much damage could be taken by armor, there was no numerical value. Secondly, skills and equipment were randomly generated, and there was no distinction between classes. Mastery was all there was. The players would unlock and explore their own mastery during the course of the scenario. If they had the ability, they could train all 6 masteries to grade S. With such a high degree of freedom, the biggest selling point of Thriller Paradise other than the terror point system was the title system. It allowed the players to not get lost in the complicated combat at the later stage of the game. While ensuring the personalization of a game character, it provided a key point. This system could be said to be the finishing touch that Dream Incorporated had come up with after much thought. The title would give the player a special power outside the limitation of the 12 skill slots. For example, Long Almine's Lightning Bash was a special power that did not take up any skill slots. The title would change as the player grew. Starting from level 10, the system would update the player's title based on the player's performance and ability after the scenario was completed. Furthermore, each title was unique. Even if there was a title with the same name, the special power that it gave might not be the same. The special power did not have to be an active skill. It could be a passive skill or even an inconspicuous bonus. During the open beta, in scenarios above level 20, the title was like a trademark. When queuing up to enter team survival mode, it did not matter what the teammates' names were. The players would usually look at their teammates' titles first, and after that, they would know what they were good at. For example, Valiant Forward, Reckless Boxer, and Accurate Gunner. They were simple and easy to understand at a glance. Of course, one could also see the strength of a player's title. Once you reached LV40 and above, other than the titles mentioned earlier, you might also see titles like Eastern Heretic, Western Poison, Southern Emperor, and Northern Beggar. Back to the topic, while Long Aomin and Wang Tanji were dealing with the zombie, Feng Bujue was moving forward in the Dark Police Station. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.